Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined today by a very unusual group of guests. They've all been on the show, obviously, before, many times, actually, between them. But I wanted to get this combination together to talk about a specific topic or a specific series of topics. I'll get into why that is in a minute, but let's go around and say hi to everyone first. Rick Hogue.
Hey.
Lawyer extraordinaire. Good to see you, my friend. How are you today?
I'm doing okay. I am lawyering. It's the work day, and I get to talk with you all, so that's a good work day for me.
Wonderful. How's your health? How's everything? How are you feeling? What's going on?
Recovery is continuing to go well. I have a lot more dexterity with my hands, so that's been nice. But overall, I can't complain about anything.
Good. I can. But nonetheless, it's good that you
well,
can. Yeah.
In respect of my recovery. I mean, I think we're all human beings. We can all complain about a number of things.
Oh, yeah, I know. Well, I'm glad you're well. I'm glad you're here. You just came up in an email last night because we're talking about our future live shows and which one we want to bring you to. So stand by on that.
Will do.
Gene Park, Washington Post, punching up. How are you today, my friend? Good to see you.
Good afternoon. Just eager to talk about this topic.
You are definitely promoting Cal State Fullerton in a major way today.
Oh yeah, well, Michigan law too, actually.
And here. Michigan. Oh yeah, of course. Is that where you went, Hogue?
It is. Yeah. That is my alma mater.
Yeah, that is awesome. Exactly. Yeah, so I figured Hogue would be here, so I just wore this shirt just to confuse people. That who's a lawyer? Like, oh, is that Hogue? I didn't know he was Korean.
Did you go to undergrad there too?
I did not.
No. Okay. Where did you go to undergrad? I don't even know why I don't know that.
I went to Hillsdale College for undergrad, so I got the full political experience from Hillsdale and University of Michigan.
Interesting. Very cool. Yeah, I know you're a Michigan sports fan. I love their Northeastern play. Their hockey teams play each other, and I love the Michigan helmets with the like lines on them, just like the football helmet, which is pretty cool. Mm-hmm. They do that even to their hockey helmets, which I think is kind of neat. All right, finally. Jason Polanski, you're a senior producer at Atari or just producer?
The actual title that I have is associate director of production. But but that's too convoluted and not really explaining of what I do. I mean, being a producer is not even really explaining what I do because defining a producer is kind of tough. But yeah, that's my actual title. But I always introduce myself as a producer, senior, whatever. Actually, all of our producers are titled senior producers, so it's kind of irrelevant.
That's like at IGN when we had like 7 editors in chief. Didn't really make any sense.
That's what big law firms do too, is they make you a senior partner as quickly as possible.
So, Jason, you've been on the show twice, right?
Yep.
So this is your third appearance. Obviously, the other two have been on the show many times. And I wanted to get you guys together because we kind of been having in the behind the scenes different strands of a similar conversation, I think, which is about what's going on in the games industry with the enthusiasts, the sector of core enthusiasts, kind of like this Gamergate 2.0 feel going on, whatever the case might be. And we've all had these separate conversations, and I thought we could represent them with the 3 of us or the 4 of us, because I guess I'll participate in a unique way, because we have the kind of the legal aspect. Plus, Hogue, I saw you did a video on the Sweet Baby Inc. situation a few weeks ago, I think.
I did.
We'll have your kind of perspective. We'll have Gene's perspective from, mainstream media and journalism and writing about games and all that and what his stance is. And then Jason will be on from the creation of games and kind of the development and publishing side of it. And I think it's funny because we've had different strands of why each person matters on this conversation and contributes to it. I'm really excited to have this group of people together because I think it's going to be a really fulsome conversation. I hope. I don't know. We'll see. So I emailed you guys last night. Let me bring it up. As I always do, I email at like 1 a.m. And sometimes I just get energy to write emails. Like I just sit at my computer to do something and then I'm like, oh, there's 7 emails I haven't written or like responded to. And I write them all at like 3 a.m. So I told you guys that I was looking to attack things from 4 different angles, which we will, but I wanted to use the overarching question of how would you describe this moment in games from an enthusiast consumer's point of view as a way to kind of set it off and see what happens? Because we don't really necessarily have to talk about the DEI stuff. We don't necessarily have to talk about what's going on with media, but I think it all kind of intermixes. So that's my angle. I'm excited to get into this. Jason, let's start with you. How would you describe this moment in games from an enthusiast point of view? I think that this is kind of the central nugget of it, in my opinion, of the tension between the creation and coverage of games and the consumption and playing of games. If you look at it from their perspective and you remove yourself from the industry, and I think we all have to kind of do that for this conversation in some sense, how do you look at this moment in games and how did we get here?
It's easy to remove myself from from here because I'm a player of games myself. I've been playing games my whole life. So I've seen the evolution, been playing since, the early 90s when I was a kid and seen it evolve to this point. I think this moment in time is, I think it largely is driven by everything else. And for some reason, things have become very, very political. And a lot of that is driven by social media. But I also think it's a victim of, I think what we see online is not necessarily representative of real things. Like, what do you hear all the time? Twitter's not real life, right? And yet, where are gamers? Gamers are always at the forefront of technology. And therefore, they're going to probably be the most online people and therefore being most representative of all things in that culture, both positive and negative. So that's ultimately where I'd say I'm coming from here. And then I have a lot more opinions other than that. But I'd say that's how we got here, and that's where we are now.
It's an interesting point. Gamers have often been at the forefront just technologically, and therefore it's like Usenet, Web 1.0, early fan sites. A lot of this stuff was driven by the video game culture.
You could capture that in a bottle just looking at VR right now, right? Like, I had the same conversation. Like, my dad, he just bought a Vision Pro, right? Didn't buy any Oculus before that, didn't buy any of that stuff. But what was the thing that was pushing VR first and foremost?
Is he an Apple fan?
Oh, totally. Biggest Apple fanboy. Yeah, absolutely. 100%. He's like, you couldn't do the things I'm doing on this thing. I'm like, yeah, actually I could, but that's fine. But just look at the difference. Where did VR live for, let's say a decade at least? I think that's when I first tried it. It was 10 years ago at CES, where that was all done through games. And now it's hitting the consumers like 10 years later, after we had a long time to beta test it, like figure out what actually works and doesn't.
Gene, from your perspective, how would you describe this moment in games from an enthusiast consumer's point of view? So from the player's point of view, in your mind?
Yeah, I guess as a player, it's a little bit similar to, I guess, how I felt about Gamergate in 2014, which was very confused and seeing this as a huge, massive misunderstanding on a massive scale. I actually try to look up what I have tweeted about Gamergate in the past, and literally the only tweet I have about Gamergate while Gamergate was happening in 2014 was talking to my very, very old editor from like college, right? And I was like, "Hey, have you heard about this Gamergate stuff? Maybe isn't this the kind of stuff that we were talking about back in 2002 about ethics in game journalism?" And that's exactly what I thought the whole conversation was about. I literally thought just flat out that it was about ethics in games journalism, about access journalism, about people, trying to buy access and stuff like that. I didn't hear anything about any of the social stuff at all. That was my flat out understanding. So that's why I'm very sympathetic to people when they say, "Oh, I thought it really was about ethics in game journalism," because I was one of those people. I was not that online in 2014. Because Jason brings up a great point. The gamers are very, very online, and we do shape the culture of online culture. 4chan. So much of 4chan is gamer culture, and 4chan shapes a lot of the internet. But I was not that online in 2014. In 2014, I was actually trying to, one, get sober, and two, leave Hawaii and get a good job in the mainland in the United States, which is exactly what I did. And the next year, I got hired at the Washington Post. So I did my job. I was offline enough that I paid attention and did a good job enough to get hired. But the result of that was that I was very, very not clued in on what Gamergate was. So even for me, look at this now, I still look at it as a massive case of misunderstanding, and we can explain why later on too. But that's how I would sum it up.
What about you, Hogue? How do you answer this question about this moment in games from an enthusiast consumer's point of view?
Well, I really like the perspective of gamers adopting technology early and being as online as they are. Not that that's necessarily healthy, but to take a little bit of the wind out of that sail, I do think this is not unique to games, right? As somebody that loves media and culture and follows all these things in various forms, I look at this as very similar to what I saw from like YouTubers and culture critics with The Last Jedi and movies moving forward in the MCU and things of that nature on YouTube and other social media, where you've got these notions about something is happening to the culture that I like, the pop culture that I consume, what I enjoy, and I don't like the direction it's moving in. And so I can frame that legitimate criticism in ways that are maybe not legitimate, because the loudest voice in the room often gets the clicks and often gets the likes and subscribes. And I think that the social media kind of way it functions helps make that happen. But I don't think it's unique to games. I really do think it's around everything in media today.
It's interesting you say that, because I think it's on a gradient. I agree with you, and it's on a gradient somewhere in the middle of things that are being even more torn apart and things that are kind of lesser torn apart. So I would use politics as the extreme. Like, the political scene is fucking crazy at this point. Like, people say, I'm a student of history. It's not like I have a PhD, but I know history and I know American history. And it's like, people are like, oh, it was like this back. And it's like, always been like, it's like, no, it really hasn't. Like, it really, really has never been quite like this. And with this level of furor, but also communicative, it's like the 1850s if they were on the internet, like, where everything's just falling apart and you can witness it. It's not something you can put away. And that's one of the things that I think is important too, because I believe it was Jason that said, and I could be wrong, something about like how, like, what is rooted in reality and like, is it real life or not? And what I find with social media is that that's extremely true, but becoming less so every day that moves on. So 2016 is a good example of, if you with Trump and Clinton as just a political example, it's like Clinton would have won that election 95-5 if Twitter was a real place, but it's not. Now you kind of see this civil war breaking out between Biden and Trump people, in which they both seem equally representative, and it doesn't actually you can't actually tip the scale. You actually don't know the way it's going to play out in real life. I have no idea what's going to happen. I suspect Trump's going to win, but I have no idea what's going to happen. And I think that the lines are blurring a lot. But to answer this question from my point of view, and I wonder what you guys think of this, is I think there are three things. I think from an enthusiast point of view, they're suffering from games publishers and developers, I think, largely taking them for granted and communicating poorly about the decisions that they make and why they make these decisions, including things like game pricing, expansions, DLC, and all of this. It's not that these things shouldn't exist or that game pricing shouldn't even go up. I think it should go up on the top end, as I've said many, many times, unabashedly. But I understand why people they don't understand. And I think this is a major thing that Jason wants to talk about later, is like, I don't think people understand how games are made. But I also don't think gamers understand why games should cost what they cost. I don't think gamers understand why DLC is put into a game. I don't think gamers understand why expansions are investigated, why updates take time, why, like, things like this. And I think that because we have such a communicative, detail-oriented, fun space, I think people that play games are like, well, where's all the information? Like, where's all the tangible information? I don't understand anything. And I think people have moved. The average film buff understands far more about how to make films. In fact, probably could make a film, maybe not very well, while a person who loves games would not even know. They don't know what middleware is. They don't know like what a dev unit is. They don't know. And that's fine. But I think that that's one thing. The second thing is the media has shifted completely. And this is the major thing I'm noticing about this moment, is how there is no power in the powers that be anymore. Like, whether it's, mainstream media like Kotaku or whatever, it's totally different. It's flipped on its head from my perspective, where the Gamergate quote unquote side is winning, like in my opinion, in this argument, in this fight of culture, while the last time I don't think they won in quotes at all. And finally, I noticed this just kind of goes in with what I was saying earlier about poor communication, but just things rooted in reality. They realize that, as anyone could, unless they rely on you, that something is wrong with the way like this is all operating, and that at the nexus of all of this, I think, could be like a traveler spirit, as I like to call it, of people that don't really care about games working on games, people that don't really care about the games industry making decisions about games. And this goes from the corporatocracy and C-suites all the way to DEI related things and everything in between. People that make poor decisions. we talk many times, Gene and I, and Gene, I know you and I have talked about this about G4. Like, people earnestly at NBC thought that was a good idea. Mm-hmm. And that's so funny to me because like I would have taken a few grand of their money for consulting for a day and been like, guys, under no circumstances is this going to work. Under no circumstances is your $200 million bet on G4 going to pay anything. You're going to lose all of it. Mm-hmm. And lo and behold, so that's like a level of like, who's making the decisions and how did we even get to this place where people are making such poor decisions? So I think all of that, if that makes any sense, kind of brings us to this really confused point of like, I understand the enthusiast consumer's point of view as being fractured and fucked.
What I find interesting about that example, Colin, is that you used a consultancy to explain how you can get better information to the powers that be at the publisher side of things, right?
There you go.
And we're talking about consultants here. We're talking about outside parties offering their advice to those powers that be. And so you can see how different sides of a culture fracture can see this happening in Gamergate 2.0 or what have you, and come at it from a different point of view, right? Because they do see the same thing as you. They see people making bad choices. That might be racism one way or the other. That might be something as simple as G4 funding, and they need smart people to help them not make stupid decisions. And that's part of the conversation.
Yeah, it's well said. And you're right. Consultancy is such a big part of this because that's obviously how it all began in like this micro argument that kind of spawned everything with Sweet Baby Inc. And I do agree that people don't understand what consultancy does. I should put all my cards on the table just so people are clear and say I've consulted, but never for I've had many opportunities to consult on games for publishers or developers, but I don't want to do that. I feel like that's kind of a conflict of interest for me, and I don't really need to do that. However, I haven't really consulted this year, but I have consulted on several entities where they're adjacent to games and they want to understand the space. So like I literally go into these sessions with executives, like, over Zoom or whatever, where they're literally asking me questions about the games industry sometimes for a couple hours. Like, just like, oh, so what does this mean? And who's this? And what is Xbox? And like, what, like, that's the kind of shit I consult on. So I should put my cards on the table. And I don't look for these gigs. It's usually someone I know, someone asking me.
Well, and providing legal services is a kind of consulting, period, right? It's legal consulting. And I have also given my 2 cents on things like the Activision Blizzard King deal to investment broker houses and banks and things like that. So nothing hitting the development of video games, but I have taken consulting money, certainly, and entered into those contracts in the past.
All right. So I broke things down. I'm glad we got those cards on the table just so there's no conflicts of interest, by the way. Not that there would be, but I wrote out 4 questions that I wanted to get into here. And Jason, we'll go to you here and we'll go around the horn again. And we can, by the way, this can go however we want it to go. It doesn't have to follow the structure. I just wanted to make sure that we approach this thoughtfully because it's such a charged topic, right? People are waiting in the wings with their preconceived notions and all of that. I just want to be fair. So, let me ask you this, and you're going to have a great instinct. I think you're at a publisher right now. Why is there tension between players in traditional media and players and many publishers and developers? So this, I feel like, is obvious. And I feel like this has been obvious. This has been growing. I feel like this started in the PS3 era and has been growing to a point where I feel like there's a dimensional sort of grouping of developer, publisher, and then enthusiasts on the other side, and they seem to be at odds with each other. I think about day one DLC, online passes, all that weird shit that started getting people mad. And then we come here and it's so much more magnified. But what do you think is at the root of this?
I think it kind of goes back to what, Hogue said it as well, like the fans of anything. He mentioned Star Wars as an example. And I think that gaming is, gamers, it's such a weird term to say, but like I could even liken it to Atari fans, right? I encounter them all the time because they make up our community and they've been playing a lot of these people have been playing for decades, right? It's a 51.5-year-old company at this point. And they have, whenever you're a fan or you're engaging with something for that much time, you're going to feel like you have some skin in the game. And in a way you do, because you've invested so much into it financially. And then once you give somebody, this goes back to the social media thing and what amplifies everything is you're giving them a microphone to easily say at any point, hey, I'm not happy. I am happy. People who aren't happy are always louder than those who are. And they have certain expectations. They think they know what they want. And in some cases, they know, or I should better yet say, they know what they want. They actually believe it. They firmly believe it. And maybe they do. But you still have to create new products. So as a publisher or a developer, like you're always trying to make something new because you're going to have diminishing returns on the thing that's same old or like slowly revving on the thing that's old before. And you're always going to have that risk of displeasing those loyal fans that come before. And to your point, in an industry that things are pretty secret, like you basically are presenting that end product that is the result of largely good intention. Now, granted, there's of course the capitalistic demands, and again, the good intention there is we need more money to survive, right? And that's where you could get to the things like higher prices or microtransactions or other things, and that just becomes the reality of business at a certain point. Like we're not here to talk about capitalism, but that is a large part of what's happening with the industry today as well, specifically from like layoffs and that kind of stuff. But I ultimately think it comes down to ownership and fandoms and the amount of skin they had in the game that makes them vocal about these things.
Yeah, that's why I want to. It's funny. I'm writing a note to make sure we get to it later. You kind of touch on something, especially with what you were saying last, which was this idea of gatekeeping and like audience gatekeeping, and how I kind of think that is one of the solutions to the larger problem in a weird way. It's not what the companies want, but it's what like the audiences want, and I'm more concerned about what the audiences want. We get into that for sure, but it's funny, man. I think we take for granted. You're absolutely right. Like the interaction between audience and creator is crazy right now. And I just mean from the instantaneous nature of it. I look through my old G.I. Joe shit when I'm collecting it sometimes, and you'll get like these little, I don't have any of them here, like a brochure that comes with like a vehicle in like 1988. And you guys will remember this. It's like you open it up and there's a little thing, send in your flag points and $5 and get this thing. It'll get there in 8 to 10 weeks. It's like, what? Can you, I just always remember that as a kid. It almost put me off from wanting to do anything. So I'm like, that is such a long time. And now I order something on Amazon and it gets here the next day and I'm not even paying for them to ship it at all. It's very strange. Like our generations have lived in a very unique and strange time where all of the barriers are broken down. You used to have to write a letter. You know this, Gene? You used to have to write a letter to the editor, like write a letter and mail it. When I used to read Nintendo Power, I used to send them letters in Washington, right? And I used to decorate the envelope. Remember that? And then it never got chosen because my art was horrible, but I loved that stuff. It's so easy now, but it also, from the reception point of view, so like Nintendo receiving that stuff, it's like, well, how much you get so much feedback now that you almost can't do anything with it. At least that's what I feel like with our small audience. Sometimes I'm like, I don't know what to do with these 10 pieces of conflicting information that you're all giving me. So
maybe you should hire a community manager, Colin. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I'm kidding, but yeah.
Well, I don't know. You guys weren't privy to this because I don't know if it happened in Discord, but Ben kind of got promoted like over the holidays because he's doing like our live show stuff and a lot of stuff with like social video and all of that. And I'm like, do you want to just be called community manager instead of associate producer? And he explicitly asked to not be called community manager.
I know. Yeah. I figured he wouldn't. Yeah. I also would be like, fuck no, please don't call me that. So.
Yeah. It's a weird title. I would want to keep associate producer as well. But Gene, let's stick with you, my friend. Why, from your perspective, so you're at media. So we have the publisher point of view. Now let's get the media point of view. Why is there tension between players and traditional media and players and many publishers and developers? Do you see it developing in this sort of way? What do you think?
I'm gonna start out harsh on the media because I'm largely going to be defending like folks at Kotaku throughout this, right? But I'm going to start out pretty harsh, and the reason why I feel sympathetic towards this clash between the public and the media, especially in some of the more larger known subjects and topic matters, is because some of the fucking articles are fucking stupid. That's why, and so you would get mad about that, right? These are the same articles that people would get mad at you for calling out, Colin, because you thought they were stupid too, right? Mm-hmm. One article that comes to mind that seems particularly silly to me is the article about Sifu and all the hubbub about Sifu's cultural appropriation.
Right. slow clap.
And
right. Yeah.
And that conversation is so like very like college entry level racism like 101. That it's not only boring and like self-serving, but it's not even really accurate and not reflective of the reality of, say, martial arts, for example, right? So martial arts is part of like Asian culture, right? But it's a sport also, so to say that like a French black belt master can't be the consultant on a game like Sifu to properly teach kung fu is just wrong, because he has the black belt. He literally has a license to appropriate the culture and proliferate it around the world. He lives in France, so that's exactly what he did. There's these notions of cultural appropriation don't happen in martial arts, because if you have, and we just had this conversation in Constellation about martial arts, but if you've done martial arts before, the entire process is us Asians are getting the strongest people of us, and we are going to beat the shit out of you until you learn to respect the martial art and understand it. And once we figure out that we respect you enough, fine, you get a black belt and you can go around and start doing that yourself. The entire point is that we are kicking our ass so you can have the license to culturally appropriate it, and then so to tag Sifu on something like that, it just doesn't make any sense. It's a sport. It's a physical activity. That's like saying black people can't play basketball because basketball was invented by a white man, James Naismith, right? Dr. James Naismith. He invented basketball. It's a sport to be proliferated. People are supposed to learn it. People are supposed to teach it to each other.
Well, I thought that's what cultural diffusion always was. Like when I was a kid, it's like it's what I always bring up about my mom. Like my mom's parents, like my mom's dad, for instance, like was from Italy. Like they came over and when they were very young, and they explicitly didn't teach my mom and her sisters Italian because they wanted to culturally diffuse, like be like, we don't want you to be any different. We wanted you to take a little bit of yourself and bring it in, but we don't want you to like be separate.
That is exactly what happened to me. And I'm not saying that what my mom and dad, what my mom in particular did, but she did exactly the same thing to me. She did not teach me Korean because she wanted me to acclimate better into Western American culture. She was like, you're born an American, so you're going to be an American. I'm going to give you an American name. You don't even have a Korean name, So that was exactly the mentality that she had. So that explains a lot of where I come from too.
Different time.
You see these articles and you just feel you feel like what's going on. There's a recent article that a lot of people got mad about in Polygon about Zelda and how rescuing Princess Zelda and defeating Ganon is akin to keeping the status quo, the political status quo. And then the piece goes on to say, defeating Ganon is voting back in the anti-trans politician. Defeating Ganon is keeping in pro-climate or anti-climate change like policies.
You're making this up. That's not real.
No. I'm serious. So that's why, like, do we see any of this writing in film criticism? Do we see any of this writing in like music criticism? I don't know. I don't really see a lot of that.
I'd say a little.
Those are reaches, right? Like you can't really like look at Zelda and think like, oh, this is indicative of every kind of social policy that we're having right now. And sure, you can think that way. And ultimately, I'm very pro publishing whatever the hell you want. Like, if anything, I'm really libertarian in that respect, right? But you have to realize that some people will think that these are stupid, and people are gonna say that out loud. And so that's why, like, I never really had a problem with what Colin was doing, because if you're publishing public work, then you're gonna have to take these criticisms publicly.
Yeah. By the way, that's
the nature of journalism, right?
Right. What you're referring to, for people that don't know, is that I used to really blast bad articles a lot more on social media.
Yes.
And
you stopped that. Thank goodness. Thank you.
Yeah, like a while ago, like a few years ago.
You stopped that like years ago, actually. Yeah.
But because I haven't posted like really socially on Twitter in probably 3 years at this point. But so I stopped it before even that. And it wasn't really, first of all, people have to understand the context of like, these people are completely adversarial to me, so I feel no need to be nice to them.
Of course.
And when they make fun of and wish bad things to happen to me and all these kinds of things in my company. So it's like when I see your byline come up on some shitty article, I feel no reservation in sharing that and making fun of it. I have no problem with that at all. I to your point, I was surprised by people's like very precious. People used to tear my shit apart. I had a huge audience at IGN. I used to write things and people would be like, I've written some things people still talk about years and years and years and years later, where like, that sucked. It's like, when you put your shit out there, people are going to have things to say about it.
And also you talk about mail, right? I've been a professional journalist for over 20 years, right? I used to get hate mail by snail mail, man. You know, like they used to send that shit to me physically, and I would get it 8 to 10 weeks later about an article that they fucking hated like 8 to 10 weeks ago. You know, but I've been used to this, you know, and I think a lot of these journalists are young. They're not quite battle hardened. You know, they're not. How would Dave Chappelle put it? I don't know. I don't know. Yeah, but they're not battle hardened. You need to understand that the public is going to consume your work and they will publicly talk about it, and not all of it's going to be good.
Yeah, you're not immune, and obviously, when you write things as bad as some of these people are talentless, in my opinion. And so, like when you somehow found your way in, you expect to just get away with writing some of this trash? I don't think so. Not on my watch.
Yeah. And then so it kind of comes back to how like I might get defensive about Kotaku, because there is a certain defensive-ness within like the quote unquote cabal of journalists, right? But like it is our field, it is our career, so I would still defend the Kotaku journalists, even though I think their article sucks, just because I think that it's great that they're publishing and whatever, you know. But ultimately, you know, I do think that we are sending a lot of like young writers into the fire by letting them write these takes that aren't really well thought out. I don't know. I just feel like that we need better writers, you know. So
yeah,
in general.
Yeah,
I mean, in general, yeah, just overall in games and in movies and film and in criticism, whatever, you know.
Literacy is so greatly dropping. We talk about it on Sacred and we kind of make fun of it sometimes, but like, how is it in a world with the internet, with a smartphone, with all of this shit that people can't read as well as they did 10, 20, 30 years ago? It doesn't even make any sense. It literally makes no sense how everyone can't read and write and do, like, it's just, never mind. It doesn't matter.
It does make sense. What do you mean? It started to make sense the moment people started replacing YOU with the letter U in texts. And then you limited tweets to 140 characters. And then everybody's attention span is so low. And then because you have TikTok videos,
TikTok out here, yeah,
it's like it's everything. It makes perfect sense.
That's fair. I mean, that's a totally fair observation, obviously. But I guess I look at it from just being like you have to read all day. Like if you just like. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Hogue, let's go to you. I want to get you on the record here. Why is there tension between players in traditional media and players and many publishers and developers?
Well, there's a couple of things that go on there. I want to piggyback off of what Gene said first with respect to the sensitivity, right? One of the things that you asked at the top of this, Colin, was about how people are sensitive and the ultimate immediacy of the commentary that's coming from various folks to the fans of games. I think since they are able to immediately respond to those publishers, I think you are seeing publishers and journalists be far more sensitive to these kinds of things than they need to be. That's professionally wise for them to be. And you see that in public because they respond on Twitter or whatever they're doing in these particular forums. And I think that raises the tensions for everybody. Some of that is engagement bait, right? Some of those articles are written to get you to click on them and to be angry about them. But then when you get that angry DM, you then write a second article complaining about that, and that sensitivity grows and it just keeps going. And I think then people that are looking at the Kotakus, the Polygons, or whoever else you have a particular bugaboo against in the video game journalist space and sees them making those articles and responding in this way, both find that to be, however you want to frame that, weak and ridiculous, or baiting the entire conversation in the first place, right? The other aspect of that is that when we talk about media and coverage of these things, I do think that we've basically tilted all the way in one political direction over another. And I am not going to sit here and tell you one way is right or wrong on that. I stand by the watchword of reasonable minds can differ. But when you go and you only present one side of an issue, time and time again, you do get this kind of reactionary pushback from forces that don't already agree with you. And I think a lot of the articles that are written and a lot of some of the commentary that you get from corporate messaging from a publisher or developer's side is written to the folks that already agree with them and not trying to convince others that they're acting in the right, but already kind of preaching to the choir and creating the echo chamber even more kind of thickly than it might otherwise exist. So when you ask why is there this tension, I think because you've got people that can talk to each other very immediately, very specifically, and they're not always listening to each other, and they're not always thinking about what their response is going to be perceived as from one direction or another. So I think you've got people in video game fandoms that are bad actors that or that aren't thinking about the things that they are saying about people, right? I will always tell you first and foremost that other person is still a person and that you don't want to other them. You don't want to demonize them. That's not going to convince anybody of your position. And so you have bad actors on the fandom side. You have bad actors on the publishing or journalist side. And the tendency that I've seen, and I do a video series called Hangouts and Headlines where I look at articles and I look at media, is that people tend to want to demonize the other side that they find to be problematic for whatever reason, whatever you want to look at as the reason for it being problematic to you. You want to demonize that. That's an evil person. That's a bad person. That is a person that is trying to get ire or is trying to hurt the world or whatever. And I usually find it better to take a look at these positions and say, let's assume that they want to create a better world. They want better video games. They want better movies, whatever it is. And they just don't agree with you on how to get there. And I think that most people are having trouble with that piece of the pie right now. They see enemies. They see things to strike down. And when we talk about Sweet Baby Inc., we talk about any of these issues, I think a lot of it is fomented by a need for clicks, a need for engagement, a need to be seen. Whether or not that makes sense from a capitalistic or monetary perspective or an ego one, I don't know in all cases. But I think this particular fight was really kind of fanned. The flames were fanned by journalists that were jumping on a little early for what was a pretty normal kind of pushback for these kinds of things, in my opinion.
It's well said. I also think they misunderstood the moment and their own power at this moment in changing the dialogue, because a lot of these younger journalists were kind of, not to be dramatic, but like so-called like raised on that Gamergate moment and kind of tried to take lessons from it and kind of, I think, overreacted, I think is exactly right. And kind of putting the cart in front of the horse and making it so much worse.
I think the issue also is what you accurately said, is changing the dialogue. And that's not something journalists should be doing. Changing the dialogue is such a funny term, because I do think that that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to change the conversation of what Sweet Baby was, right? But that's exactly what PR people do. That is the mandate of PR. When I was in PR, we're not spinning things. I was told we're not quote unquote spinning things. We're not lying. We are directing the conversation. We're directing the dialogue. So, but it's weird that we are having journalists trying to do that and trying to steer how the tenor of a conversation should be taking place, as opposed to just covering it.
But the difference, I just want to ask this point to the group, which is about like, when you say journalism, when we're talking about games here, like there is true journalism, like your piece about Jordan Mechner, like that seems like actual journalism. You're talking to people, you're interviewing them, you're creating a piece and you're presenting a story. But most day-to-day pieces that are presented on websites like IGN and Kotaku, like it's all driven, it's all opinion, because you're writing about video games. You're writing about an artistic medium. You're writing about things that have to appeal to those tastes. Like there's a reason why not many people are writing about Atari games, because they don't really care about Atari games. But you got Atari fans who are writing about Atari games and they're writing their perspective of it. These people are writing purely opinion pieces across the board because it's all a critique on the content, right?
Yeah, but they can't go too far. I mean, I agree with Gene.
For sure. I don't disagree, and we'll get into it, I'm sure. Yeah, exactly. And I agree 100% with that.
And I have to be honest here. I actually have a certain amount of respect for the level of, let's call it creativity, you need to use to see climate change arguments in Ganon and Zelda and Link. So, I mean, if that's properly presented, I can see that as a kind of brilliant satirical piece, but that doesn't appear to be what Gene is describing.
If you're a hammer, everything's a nail. You know, like that's where I could draw all sorts of weird fucking analogies and metaphors and allegories out of everything, literally everything.
Yeah,
that was what I was looking for.
I think we all had an English teacher that probably did that. I remember the ridiculous kind of symbolic readings of some of the stuff we had to read back in school.
And it is fun to do that because I do that with video games too. Like I've brought up how I know for a fact that my interpretation of The Last of Us ending is not what was intended. Like, and knowing that kind of hurts because it's like, well, it's fun to be able to kind of glean your own interpretation on the thing.
The Last of Us was about
death of the author, Colin.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's exactly right. Well, before we get into the next thing, I wanted to kind of throw a few things out here too about my own position on this. And I think a lot of this comes into, I think a lot of the disconnect is because I think video games have become so corporatized and so big that it's naturally attracted many people that don't really care about video games to the extent that the end consumer does. Now, this is common in many places, like, you know, Coca-Cola. I doubt most of the board even drinks Coke. Probably the CEO might not even drink any of that stuff. They make it and they sell it. And it's become so huge that it's not about passion about the product. It's about money and it's about all these different things. And I respect that. But then I think about, and this is just a random example, like I use like a mom and pop lawn care place around here. It's just a wife and a husband. They're both like chemists. And I mow my own lawn and stuff, but they like treat it with all these chemicals every month. And they work with each other every day and they're mega passionate and they like come over when you have a problem and they're like really in it and they study it and all that kind of stuff. And you can see that passion too. And if they grew, that would become diluted, right? But I think I learned this for the first time when I was a journalist, and I don't consider myself a journalist anymore, but when I was at IGN and I worked with Sony all the time. And what I came to learn about Sony, and I can't say this about other companies because I don't really know, is that none of their PR people play video games, except for, in my opinion, maybe one. Like of the ones I worked with, none of them knew shit about video games. None of them would play them optionally. You know, these are a bunch of sales or a bunch of, communications majors that found their way into Sony. They make good money. They're good at their jobs. This is what I always say about Jim Ryan. It's like, I don't care that Jim Ryan doesn't play games. It's like Jim Ryan.
They don't need to know what the widgets are in order to talk about them. Yeah,
what'd you say? I'm sorry, Hogue, I missed that.
I say they don't need to know what the widgets are in order to talk about it.
Right, exactly. But I think that this comes at a cost. And I think things have become increasingly disingenuous. We were talking about the G4 situation, and I just love that example because I'm like, what? Like a bunch of presumably smart MBAs and people from Ivy League backgrounds and people that have launched major, like they got together and like, yeah, let's do this. And it really was the proving moment for me, in addition to founding two very, very successful companies in media and knowing I can do it myself, where it's like, wow, these people don't know fucking anything. And that a lot of people find their way into these positions and fail into them. And so, of course, if that happens at the top, it's happening in the middle and it's happening at the bottom. And I think that what we're finding in the media specifically, and I warned about this, it's like when Eisenhower left in 1961 and said, you better watch about the military industrial complex, and no one listened to him, right? I left IGN and I'm like, I told them specifically, you should replace me with a deep conservative person. Like, have balance and present both sides. I'm one of the most famous people that ever worked at IGN, probably in the top 5, I would say, editors, not because of talent, but because I was different. And because it's memorable. There were better writers than me and better people that knew more about video games and played them better. But it's about presenting something interesting and authentic and balanced. And I think that media has completely lost sight of that. And I think that downstream effect that's had on publishers and developers is like, well, in the old paradigm, we rely on these dudes to get our games out. We can't have the Borderlands 2 girlfriend mode situation again. We can't have the Resident Evil 5 Africa thing again. We can't. And so their games became increasingly sterile. And since there is no there is no respect of the Chinese wall that's supposed to exist between development / publishing and media. People from media hurl themselves over the wall like they're leaving East Germany, right? And bring all of that baggage with them. And it has seeped steadily into these game developers to placate what they thought were the audiences, which are the media, but they were wrong. The audience isn't the media. The audience is the audience. The audience wants Stellar Blade. You know, the audience likes Helldivers and all of its pseudo-fascism. Like it's almost, and I've said this, and Gene, I think you and I talked about this, where it's almost like if I were a marketer at a AAA publisher, I would be like, how can we make the media as annoyed as possible? Which is something that I wouldn't have thought about 10 years ago. It's like, how can we get under the skin and get all these hit pieces written about us so we can rally people that actually buy and play games behind us? So I think that the tension is born out of the traveler. And I believe that. Like, and that's just the nature of any corporate, behemoth. Games are too big to not have travelers anymore, but we've given them way too much power. We've given them power to consolidate. We've given them power to publish garbage. We've given them power. Look at what Embracer did. I called that from the beginning. I was like, this is impossible. What they're doing doesn't make any sense. But people just close their eyes, and just people that don't know anything, they're willing to burn the whole thing down. And I think that what we need to fix this moment is a lot more gatekeeping. So that's what I would say at every level. And again, it's not about having people that play games, it's having people respect them. If you don't respect the player base, if you don't respect the audience, if you don't respect the craft, why are you here? And it almost feels like a lot of people that write about games specifically are doing it because they have no other choice. I wrote about games because I wanted to. That seems like anathema to this group. So I don't know if that makes sense. That's a lot, but that's where I stand on that.
One thing one issue I had with game journalists is that one thing you just said, that it feels like they don't have a choice but to do this, right? And one thing I wonder is that they could always, and I'm not saying that there's a lot of jobs in journalism, right? But I never hear a games journalist lose their job and be like, you know what, I'm going to try regular journalism for a little bit. I'm going to try working at I'm going to try applying at the local TV station or the local newspaper, and have a real deadline for once, totally. and try that out, But I never see that, and like it was really disappointing when like the Game Awards like has this future class awards, and then about 2 years ago, everyone was like, "Well, Jeff Keighley, why aren't you nominating journalists for the future class? We are the future of the industry." And I'm like, first of all, why are you asking Jeff Keighley, this industry mark, for awards for journalism, And secondly, the Game Awards is not a journalism awards. It's the Game Awards. They're going to award games, and people who make games. And thirdly, there are journalism awards. They're called the Pulitzers. They're called the Society of Professional Journalists, like local chapters. Join these, we could use your expertise, the expertise, Colin, that you have in managing this company would be invaluable to these people. But you're not out there because you don't give a shit, but who cares, right? But then there are so many IGN journalists who are so talented in editing video, and they could be so valuable to like the regular journalism the field, but they never cross. They never cross because they're not interested in journalism. They're just interested in writing about games, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and just being around video games, like the culture of games, which I appreciate. It's a bad time to get involved in that. I think that like that's a dead end at this point, which is why I feel bad about. Like you got to just the math equation of like getting noticed and all of that stuff on a YouTube channel or Twitch channel. It's like I can't even imagine. Like I fathom doing that, but I think in some sense, I just think it's strange to see, for instance, tweets from people in the industry being like, "I'm looking for a job. I will do anything." Mm-hmm. It's like, so I would, no offense to PR people. I know many great PR people. I don't deal with them anymore. I'd rather eat a bullet than try to help you sell your game. Like, seriously, I'd rather fucking live on the street than be a PR person. Mm-hmm. It's weird. And so why do I feel that way? Because I'm a fucking writer. I'm a journalist. I don't want to just be around it and be like, well, depending on the situation, maybe I'll be like an investigative journalist, or maybe I'll write fucking press releases for Sony. And just depending on what happens, I guess is where I'm going to end up. It's like, what? That is so weird. That's so weird. And that does seem exclusive to entertainment journalism. Like there's no reality
no,
in which
political journalism too. Remember NBC just had to fire Ronna McDaniel because they were going to hire her.
Right, but that seems so silly to me too, because it's like you just gave Jen Psaki a fucking show.
Well, exactly. No. The hypocrisy is through the roof. It's through the roof. It's
crazy
because we're hiring Jen Psaki, and then George Stephanopoulos has been doing his shit for like 20 years, and he was literally like Clinton's guy, right? So like the dam was broken. The dam was broken already. Like it's been the Wild West the whole fucking time, you know. But the hypocrisy is totally on its face right there, you know.
It's up to people to like see through that. And again, this is just the traveler syndrome. It's like, this is a big place. It's a stop for some people, but we don't. I find it so strange when it's like, I'm desperate for work. Yeah, like I'll do your PR. I'll do mock reviews, or I'll do hard hitting. It's like, dude, pick your lane. I mean, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to be in comms, or do you want to fucking be a journalist? That to me, I think sends really weird signals, and it's totally corrupted many publishers and developers into thinking and aiming, in my opinion, at the wrong people, and not aim. This is why I think there are such great examples in the past of like companies that were like, fuck you to the journalists. And it worked out too. Kingdom Come Deliverance is the great example of that, in my opinion, where they were like, fuck yourself. They were getting, remember they wrote that whole piece of, there was that piece of Polygon or something about how there was no black people in Bohemia in 1280, you know? And I'm like, and they just stuck with their guns and they all became multimillionaires and they're making their sequel and all that kind of stuff. I just think sticking with your guns is actually a pretty good thing to do. Getting on the, if I were going to do PR consultancy, which I would never do, but if I were to do that, I'd be like, you're a great way to sell your game is to get on the wrong side of these people because people hate them.
Well, you use Stellar Blade as an example. I think it's got a much higher profile than it would have had if it wasn't as hated as it is online.
I agree.
Well, and then we go back to the issue of the Streisand effect, right? Of this whole Sweet Baby thing didn't need to be a whole thing if the journalists and the people weren't like trying to like get the curator list banned. Now, to be clear, and this is mentioned in Alyssa Mercanti's story in Kotaku, but they're saying that it was actually started by the people who are against Sweet Baby because they were organizing a harassment campaign on Kiwi farms, and that started to bleed into the Steam curation lists. So, you know, maybe they were hearing in the emails, but I'm just putting that out there that might be part of the timeline as well in terms of who started what. But also, real quick, Colin, I just want to talk about the gatekeeping aspect that you talked about. There's an interesting conversation going on right now about Anita Sarkeesian and you know, kind of a rejudification, I guess. What's a better word, Hogue? Just a reanalyzation, readjudication of Anita Sarkeesian, because, you know, my friend Ash Parrish over at The Verge, great reporter, I love her, but she was talking about how she loves Bayonetta, right? And everybody was talking, well, you guys didn't say that back then, whatever, and then they keep quoting Anita Sarkeesian. Sadly, Ash is not Anita Sarkeesian, so it's really ridiculous that you keep trying to put Anita Sarkeesian's words onto someone else that didn't even say that and doesn't even believe that. But also, you know, all of that is also putting out the fact that a lot of people actually didn't agree with Anita Sarkeesian back in 2014 either, you know, but people didn't really say anything because they were so virulently like sexist or misogynistic against her. So it's like, okay, well, you're either you don't want to say anything because so one side is really misogynistic, but she's misrepresenting the whole issue, you know.
It's so cowardly.
Yeah, but let's talk about that a little bit, because it does take a certain amount of strength to put up with either side of the online culture wars, right? Like, Colin, we've talked about this. When I started working at Last Stand Media, I was barred from a couple of forums as essentially Gamergate adjacent because people have their own thoughts about these random things. And a lot of folks are not going to be willing to do that. And
I heard that you were Gamergate adjacent, Hogue. Like, before I even got to know you, like I was told, oh, he's Gamergate adjacent. I was like, oh shit. And I looked it up. I was like, oh, he just kind of sounds like what I did.
He's a crypto fascist.
So, yeah.
I'm a radicalized influencer, and I think those words appeared in the Washington Post, as a matter of fact. But a lot of people are not going to put up with that. the other aspect of what Gene said, I think, which we can apply more broadly than Ash and Anita, is that with those bad actors that I talked about before, there is a tendency in the human experience to assume that everybody that you're fighting against is comprised of only those bad actors, right? So we get into it's about ethics in games journalism, but you know that somebody somewhere is being sexist or racist or harassing or whatever, and I can ignore all of the points that you're making because you are aligned with those bad people. And so that happens both directions. So when we talk about, okay, Ash isn't responsible for this because she never said these things, but Anita did, that's the kind of thing that happens when in these kinds of fights. And I think we would be best off to get away from that.
Yeah, you're making an interesting point right there. Yeah, I didn't even make that connection, but you're right in that the same thing that's happened to Ash is that it's just being brushed on all sides, you know. The folks who have a concern with Sweet Baby's quote unquote influence, and let's be clear, like Sweet Baby is not, nobody's required to listen to Sweet Baby at all, right? We know that for sure. We're consulting, you know, but the people who do have concerns with certain DEI policies or whatever like that are just being mixed with people who are just completely like unreasonable, you know.
Yeah, because I do want to talk about games a little bit here. I did this in my video, but there are aspects of games that I once liked that I did not like in the most recent passive games. And I use Spider-Man 2 as my example here because I absolutely loved Spider-Man 1. I absolutely loved Miles Morales. And something was different between those two games and Spider-Man 2. And Spider-Man 2 did take a lot of time to go, and however you want to frame this, represent things, do whatever it is that they did that was away from the plot line, that lost momentum of the storyline of Spider-Man, and I did not enjoy that game as much as the previous ones. And if I'm going to look for a reason, I might find myself looking at consultancies. I might find myself looking at changes in the executive that made that game. And for Insomniac, there weren't a lot of changes there. So it's hard to kind of isolate exactly why these things happen. And if you are interested in finding those things, you could wind up at a Steam group that says, hey, warning about this consultancy group. That's not where I am. But it's a reasonable take to say, hey, something is different. I don't like the way this game series went. What changed? Okay, if that's what changed, and I look at some other games that I also didn't like, then I might have a problem. Now, in my video, I also mentioned that I loved Alan Wake 2, and that's apparently a game that Sweet Baby consulted on, and I didn't think that was there wasn't any noticeable quote-unquote damage from their consultancy in that game. And so I'm not going to sit here and tell you I have any idea what effect they're having in the boardrooms or the development houses for these games. But I am going to say that there are aspects of video games in general outside of the media that we can look at and say, as someone that favors narrative like I do, there are games that are doing things that I don't love. And some of that is like Last Jedi, some of that is not.
But the fact that you say that there is a reasonable way to reach that conclusion makes you Gamergate.
That's why I'm adjacent. Yes.
Yeah, that's why you're Gamergate adjacent. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do not assume that they are demons that are only there for evil and to harass and be various isms, as they say in Ferris Bueller, right? So I don't assume that. I like to take people on faith to start out with until you prove me wrong, and that goes for the Kotakus of the world. That goes for the Sweet Baby Inc. detectives of the world. But it's a little bit side doesn't like that.
It's a little bit like people calling Colin a Zionist when I don't think he cares about the issue, all that issue that much to even call himself a Zionist. And as far as I know, Colin is admitting his own bias in his background, in being able to, in having grown up around his very pro-Israel.
I don't really think you can be even. I'm not even Jewish, so I can believe in Zionism, I guess, but I can't be a Zionist. Like that's not really. It doesn't really wash with me anyway. It doesn't matter. I don't care.
Yeah,
but
I just want to jump in because you brought up Spider-Man 2, and this is I think where that was my biggest moment of looking at the discourse from these guys who are so anti Sweet Baby Inc. and just trying to be like, let's look at things logically for a second. Spider-Man 2 cost $300 million, right? That we know that now. Okay, so are these people under the assumption that Sweet Baby Inc. was contracted? And then they said, hey, you know what you need? You need to put in like a 15-minute moment in the game where you actually play as the deaf girl. And then, let's say $10 million later, that gets added to the books. Like, that's insane. Like the amount of stuff that you have to do, everything to actually take direction from a consulting company that could potentially add tens of millions of dollars to your end product is so wild of a thought. Mm-hmm. Like it takes 5 seconds to see through that. And that's, Colin, when I wrote out and said, people don't understand how games are made. To pick the writers as a scapegoat is so crazy, because oftentimes a writer will come in at the end. That's very possible, where you could be like, hey, how do you fix this thing that we thought was cool in the game and make it make sense in the grand scheme of things? Or we just had to cut out this hour of the game because it wasn't fun. And now we need to stitch together this plot point that we were going to cover. Like, you would call the writers in to consult about that. You wouldn't bring them in early and be like, all right, cool. We got this character in Harlem who, his race may change depending on the flag that's in his apartment, right? And we got this deaf character, and what else can we throw in there to bump up the diversity quota and add months and years to our production time?
Yeah,
it's crazy.
It is interesting though. Like, I did think Spider-Man, like the blatant Black Lives Matter banner, when I saw those in those games, like when there's a graffiti moment or whatever, I'm like, that's cool. Insomniac is very, 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 very liberal. They had the Palestinian flag as their logo for some time on social media, which is fine, but that just shows their political affiliation. So I think people see stuff like that and it's like, that's your right to do that. I don't care what you put fucking communist propaganda in your game, for all I care. It doesn't matter to me, but it's your game. But I think people I think people in some way are being baited to notice, and then they do. And then all this argument happens. But I want to get into the next inquiry, but I want to say this about Anita and what you were saying, Gene, about people.
Maybe we should have gatekept her harder. Maybe we should be like, no, Anita,
yes.
everything you're saying is bullshit, and we should not be taking you seriously. And I'm sorry that you're being attacked like misogynistically, but you should just leave this space now. Just get out.
You could just tell by her increasing irrelevance, and now she's out, I think, completely, where it's like, it was never about her. It was about, because everyone knew that she was, I don't want to call her a grifter. Again, maybe I just use the word traveler. There's that video of her at some multi-level fucking marketing thing. I don't know what it was, but where she was saying, like, she says something like, I didn't play video games, or I've never played, or I don't play video games. And then a few years later, she's like an expert on video games. That series, from my perspective, was all that guy, Jonathan McIntosh, who's doing incredibly well for himself now, because he was the actual talent doing all the research and the writing and all of that. She was the face of it. And it's really a bummer to hear how cowardly people were to not be able to call this blatant traveler in our space out, who didn't understand video games or the way that the industry functioned. She was not part of the culture of games, and she forced her way in. I think some people think she had more power than she did. I think some people think she had no power. I mean, she definitely had influence on directions that games went.
She had influence on the direction of games, absolutely, and she had power enough. So look, I'm going to dox myself so people don't look it up, right? But I did do a panel with Anita Sarkeesian. Anita Sarkeesian was on the panel. It was an official Washington Post panel. I had nothing to do with the casting of the panel. So when I saw who the panel was, I was like, oh, fuck, great. Okay, well, let's just deal with this. Nobody cared, which is great. But I'm just putting it out there that if it was my panel, I would not have had her there. But to your point, Colin, because she did have power, she was able to easily influence the handlers at the Washington Post, who really, really wanted to have a woman's perspective on video games.
Yeah, and a specific woman's specific view on video games that will reaffirm.
Exactly, yeah. And she's the most prominent. She was the most prominent one, I guess.
Right.
So she got the job, and then so we flew her out. We paid for her and everything.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, actually, in some sense. Like, on a personal level, I never met her. I didn't know her. I knew people that knew her and stuff like that, but I was never in her circle. And I
actually met her.
Yeah, it's interesting because I never even saw her. Like when I've seen so many people at different shows and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, there's that person. I've never even seen her with my own two eyes, but her level she washed out so badly that I think it has to be a sign to her that it was completely artificial. And without the backing of specific media outlets and publishers, she had no power at all. And I did feel bad for her, but that picture of her having the fake wedding that was going around, do you guys know this at all? She had
the one from yesterday?
No, she had a wedding.
No,
and I just found this strange. Like, she had a wedding themed 40th birthday, I think, where she like
different.
And this was like circulating just a month or so ago, people like showing this, and I'm like, damn, dude, that's so sad. Like, why did you waste so much of your time doing this work that you clearly weren't even that passionate or interested in to begin with? And I don't know, man. You guys, I'll show you guys the picture. It's funny, but I never knew her. I never had a beef with her personally. I just think she was given a lot of rope. I don't know why anyone gave it to her, but you know, she had nothing. I watched entire documentaries she did. They were horrible. So I don't know. All right. Let me get into this next one here, number 2, and we'll go to you, Jason. Are the stars of the moment, and we've talked about this some of this, so I put in parentheses, DEI, journalism, Sweet Baby Inc., etc. Are they scapegoats, or is there any level of truth to various attacks on any of these entities? So this is what I'm curious about, is that I think that the inconvenient thing about this moment in time is there is a lot of accuracy. Some of it's easily deflected. Some of it is, like you said, especially with not really knowing where games come from. Like a mommy and a daddy get together, you know? But I do think that there is some truth to a lot of these attacks, specifically on the DEI front, I think. And I think I'll save it for when I go, but there's a specific person that's coming up in all of this, because I don't really know any of these people, but one of them, I'm like, oh yeah, no, that person is deeply racist. And so I'll get into that when I go, but I want to start with you, Jason. And do any of these targets deserve the ire? What's going on here?
Honestly, so I guess there's 2 examples I'll point to. One is when it comes to Sweet Baby Inc., and I guess that's really the entire focus that I can give here. I honestly don't have too much an opinion on the journalism stuff to an extent, to be honest, but I'll leave that to you and your expertise. But the Sweet Baby stuff is most interesting to me. Are they a scapegoat? Absolutely. Like, there's not a question in my mind that these guys are a scapegoat for the ire, and this came up before, because these guys don't have nearly as much power as people think they do. So as a source of to say, oh yeah, the reason why these games are the way they are is because of them specifically, that's literally the definition of a scapegoat. When games have directors, games have game designers, games have multiple entities. When you have a game like Spider-Man being a great example, it's not just Insomniac, it's Sony. Those are the majority of your stakeholders. Sweet Baby Inc. is a blip on the production of that game, and anything they submit has to go through the approval, and it should come under the ownership of the director, of the producer, of the whatever. Like, when I'm a producer on a game, I take ownership of those things, even though I didn't do 99% of the work. Like, that's done by the developers, but I oversee it. I stamp the approvals to say, yeah, you guys pass this milestone. I am okay with the work you have done. Therefore, this can now move forward and keep being made. And we've contracted writers, we've contracted other people to consult and give opinions and that kind of stuff on games. And all that stuff has to pass the smell test. And I give feedback on games to the developers. And even they will say, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's not. Like, it's all a collaborative experience. But at the end of the day, somebody has to take ownership. And Sweet Baby Inc. is not producing anything. To that point, when you talk about the truth of this, somebody posted, and it's basically one guy who keep following, and I don't want to, if you want to look him up, you can. I don't want to name names. But he posted this long thing about compulsion games, and he's been posting about these guys for a while. And most of the things he's posting seem factual to a point, but he's presenting it like it's a negative, where in most cases you say, like, he's talking about compulsion games, and they're making this game that takes place in, like, in New Orleans, right? Yeah, in the South, and there's a black character and that kind of stuff. So it says here,
he claims that the character was white until DEI people got involved and made
right. And his reference is like an in progress model that is barely, you can't even tell. That could go either one way or the other. But he says things like, he says the main character was race swapped. He said the team is, where's the thing that he says about the team is like the dev team is almost entirely white and based in Montreal, and many devs felt uncomfortable creating a game in the Deep South with so little experience. So then it says SBI and POC writer were brought in to help with a more authentic perspective. That makes sense. That's why you bring in those things. Like those two things track and make perfect sense. Mm-hmm. That's why you would do that. Mm-hmm. If I wanted to make a game about something and wasn't entirely sure how it worked, but had a genuine fascination and thought a good game could be made from it, I would find somebody who was an expert in that field, or at least could find expert in those fields, to make it more of an authentic experience. We're an industry now that's reliant on a lot of immersion and those kind of things, and it's very easily breakable. Mm-hmm. The next point, and I'll stop after this, is the CEO of Sweet Baby Inc., Kim Belair, and her GDC speech that everybody always points to. And now if you look up her speech, the first results are racist, unhinged, crazy. It was the night before GDC, and like most times before I have an early morning flight, I can't sleep. So what do? I endlessly scroll through Twitter and watch videos, because that really seems to help me go to sleep. I watched the entire GDC video, not under the one hosted by GDC themselves, and I watched the entire thing. Mm. And there was nothing that I found racist in the entire thing. I actually found a point where I was like, oh yeah, I get where she's coming from, because she was saying that, she was playing a game and she found somebody who was actually, who was representative of her, and there was a moment that actually resonated with her on a personal level. And that was interesting to me, because I had a similar moment like that. Specifically, and I'll try not to do any spoilers here, but during The Last of Us Part 2, you are in a house. It is a Jewish house. And when you walk through the house, there are mezuzahs on the door. Mm-hmm. And that is a very specific detail that mm-hmm. only a Jew would actually know. Mm-hmm. And that was one of those points where I was like, oh, wow, they actually put in that level of detail? Mm-hmm. That's interesting. And that speaks to me as someone who's not a practicing Jew at all, but still something that was interesting. So I get trying to create those moments when you have that type of diversity in games. But I also don't think it's something that is actually being driven as the main focus of games, because it just doesn't make sense. And I don't think that's actually and I don't think that's what people are doing. So hopefully some of that made sense.
No, that's well said. I really appreciate that answer. I think that there's a lot there. And I'm going to go last, but I agree with you that I think there's gray to it now, but Sweet Baby Inc. was certainly a scapegoat. Like when they started getting noticed in the fall of 2023, people mm-hmm. were messaging me and being like, look at these guys. I'm like, I don't care. Like, I don't care. It wasn't
That's around the time the Kiwi Farms harassment campaign started. So that tracks around for fall. So
right. Fall. Yeah. And then it wasn't until that Chris Kindred guy or whatever his name is made that. It's like, well, there you go. I mean, you made a massive mistake, like a massive blunder in doing that. It shouldn't be shrugged off.
I agree it's a blunder too. That's why even if it was amassing in Kiwi Farms, you didn't need to go on Twitter and start doing that. That's just a blunder.
It was a huge blunder, and it was when Kotaku wrote about it and didn't acknowledge that was an order of magnitude worse blunder. And now you have a real conspiracy. It's like, it is what it is, but anyway, I'm going to go last. I don't want to overtake this yet. Gene, let me go to you. Are the stars of the moment, DEI, journalism, Sweet Baby, etc., are they scapegoats, or is there any level of truth to the various attacks?
I think there is a level of truth to the attacks, but I do want to echo what Jason said about consultancy, right? And the value of consultancy. So I used to be a community manager of the investigative news site Civil Beat. Civil Beat is started by Pierre Midyar. Civil Beat was started basically as the precursor to whatever Glenn Greenwald ended up doing, right? But at Civil Beat, we cover Hawaiian issues. But at Civil Beat, almost all of our staff were white, which is an incredible feat to accomplish in Hawaii. They definitely went out of their way to not hire local people, because a lot of people were hired, from the mainland, because the people in the States have better investigative journalism chops. So that's how it ended up, right? But it was basically a mostly white staff. So me as the non-white guy at Civil Beat, I actually hired a native Hawaiian consultant to come in and talk about Native Hawaiian issues, including issues about burial sites and cultural competency. Because I just felt like they just really needed to make sure that all of that is in line, because we're not making sure that we're not covering Native Hawaiian issues terribly, and also, to be clear, I've also been a prominent member of the Asian American Journalists Association. I am the former president of the DC chapter. I'm a former president of the Hawaii chapter, and the Asian American Journalists Association is a media advocacy group where we do make sure to that coverage of Asian folks is proper and correct and not offensive. So there are many groups like that. One issue I have with Tucker Carlson, Colin, because I know you love Tucker, but the part of the reason why I've always had an issue with Tucker is because he purposely misconstrues and misunderstands the purpose of a group like the Asian American Journalists Association or the the National Association of Black Journalists. He thinks that we're just like completely exclusive. No, we have white people all over all of these groups. The whole point is that you're just helping us out and making sure that Black people and Asian people and Hispanic people are covered correctly. We're not being exclusive to anything. Our national secretary at the Asian Journalist Group was white, and her name is Candace, and she was the secretary for like almost a decade. So folks like Tucker completely misunderstand and misrepresent groups like this. So I do think that groups like us are being scapegoated, and because again, there's a huge misunderstanding. That's why my initial answer for the first question is misunderstanding. I think there's a lot of miscommunication, misunderstanding going on a lot of sites in terms of the work that we do.
Yeah, it's well said. I'll have more to say about that when I go, but Hogue, let's get you in on here. I haven't heard from you in a while. Let me just pitch it to you so the audience knows. Are the stars of the moment, DEI, journalism, Sweet Baby Inc., etc., are they scapegoats, or is there any level of truth to the various attacks?
Well, I think I have to lawyer this, right? Because that's my job. And I will say they are both scapegoats and not, right? So yes and no. It depends, as it were. This is how we get billable hours, folks. But no, in all honesty, I think that they are scapegoats.
As a former PR person, I also do that too. Because there's what is your message? Is it great or bad? I don't know. Well, let's talk about the pros and cons of this.
Yeah, let's suss it out. We're on a conversational show here. Let's talk about it,
please.
So yeah, they are scapegoats, obviously, insofar as you see some of the arguments online as they caused X to happen. They forced diversity. They made the girlfriend for Miles Morales deaf and gave her that sequence. I agree with that entirely, that is scapegoating. That is not what happened. However, I do think that there are legitimate ways to get to not that Sweet Baby is causing these things to happen, but that they are, rather than the disease, they are a symptom of things that I won't like in my video game experience, right? That it's Sweet Baby Inc. detected. Not that they ruined everything, but that if they are involved, that means that the people that made the game, whether it's Sony or Insomniac, the director, the producer, whoever, don't match with my understanding of what makes a good narrative in terms of pacing or storytelling or characterization. And since I have those experiences, it might be useful for me to know that producer, the companies that are responsible for what went into the game, was okay with this being the consultancy, and that those consultants tend to have this effect on the games that they make. Now, I don't tend to agree with that entirely, right? I have essentially one game that I didn't like that I know that they were involved in, and I have one game that I did like that I know that they were involved in. So I don't agree with that as the thesis, but I do think that you can come to that conclusion, and then they're not a scapegoat. That's a legitimate thing to be concerned about. It's a legitimate thing to be worried about them being involved in the game-making process. Now, I will also say that I don't think they're a scapegoat once the individuals at the company start getting involved, right? You talked about Chris Kindred. You've seen various comments online in social media and otherwise that clearly made things worse, right? You have the journalist at Kotaku who has the "you can't be racist against white people" quote and puts that up and then is deliberately trolling as the article goes up. And I have no problem with that from an engagement perspective or people doing what they want on social media, but you can't troll and create this drama and then ask me to say, why don't you respect me at the end of that whole story, right? So I think that a lot of people had a lot of vested interests in keeping this thing going and making it bigger than it was. And so I think there was a certain amount of legitimacy. I think there were bad actors there that were undoubtedly doing things that I wouldn't approve of. but I think there was a certain amount of legitimacy in being interested in when this company was involved. And then I think journalists got a little bit too involved in saying that it was illegitimate at that point in time. And then I think there's the bounce back that you get from that.
Yeah, that's well said. I generally, it's funny, there's like a gradient of like opinions as we get to me, where I'm probably going to be on maybe a little bit of the opposite side of a Jason or whatever in this situation, because I feel like we're kind of letting people off the hook a little easy. I think my major problem with this, I think, is what's different between, as I noted earlier, like what's different between a Sweet Baby Inc. in October versus today, and their willingness, or at least one of their or multiple of their employees, whatever it might be, their willingness to jump into this in an affirmative way that affirms preconceived notions about them, that injure them in a great way, which is what you're kind of saying, Hogan. I just feel like from their perspective, I don't think that they have the power that people think, but I also think that they're probably responsible for some goofy shit in games. And I also think that some of the things that people point at, so we're talking about like Spider-Man 2 and the Deaf Girl and all of that. I'm like,
they have the Deaf Girl mission. They have the Harlem music mission. They have a whole sojourns into various cultural things.
But to me, I'm like, that's cool. Like, I didn't mind that. And I don't believe, knowing Insomniac as I do, and I know them very well, is that they don't need outside influence to do that. Like, they definitely don't.
That's just them. That's just who they are.
Right. Yeah. Like, they definitely just don't need it. And they're in Burbank hanging out, and they've pretty much been the same throughout. And so you can expect that from them.
But let me say this.
Yeah, okay.
As just a counterpoint, I think that Spider-Man 1, clearly made by Insomniac, has sojourns, but the recipe is baked better, right? The combination, the pacing, the characterization, the overall story of Spider-Man 1 is better than Spider-Man 2. And I think that when we talk about consultancies and that they can be useful, I think that sensitivity readings, I think getting information about specialities to create those real moments that Jason was talking about are all good things. Like every other professional in the world, like any other company in the world, there can be folks that are good at that, and there can be folks that are bad at that. And I think that we can look at a thing like Sweet Baby Inc. Detected is not DEI consultancy detected. It's this specific company I think does bad work. Right. And I don't know that I agree with that, but I think that you can be a reasonable person and have that stance.
But the issue is that there are people who just have issue with DEI policies just overall, and we can, and that's a larger issue altogether. That's a larger cultural issue.
If you have an issue with Sweet Baby Inc., you're probably going to collect that group as well. And then we wind up having bad actors fighting bad actors. But I don't think you can lump everybody in there that says, I don't particularly like some of the pacing in God of War Ragnarok or Spider-Man 2, and they are thus racist.
Sure. Yeah.
That's kind of the problem with all these bad faith arguments, is that they're all done with broad strokes, right? Like, I can go down the list of this guy's post about South of Midnight and look at all the comments that are not hidden, and they're all in support of this guy, and there are some clearly wacky guys there. Like, the first comment was like, I don't mind she's black, but why isn't she hot? And then his response is, I know, right? Like, that's the kind of people we're dealing with in in like a very small corner. And this is what I mean by people being too online. Most people don't think like that. Most people are going to see South of Midnight and going to say, that's a pretty cool game. I'm going to check that out. Also, it's on Game Pass. I don't have to pay for it. It's fantastic.
Exactly.
That's what they're going to do. They're not going to say, wait, why is there a black girl in this game in the South of America? It's like, well, yeah. Makes sense.
So this gets into what I'm glad you brought this up, Jason, because this is one of the things that I wrote a few like bullet points here in my notes that I want to get to about this topic, which was, I think we have the wrong messengers involved on let's say the pro game. I don't like using the term Gamergate. I don't know. Like, I wasn't involved in Gamergate. That's why it's so weird to be called Gamergate adjacent, where I'm like, I didn't have anything to do with Gamergate. I don't think you're going to find one.
I wasn't even online in 2014.
But okay.
I spent about 3 hours looking up what Gamergate is because I didn't get it at the time, and I still don't know.
No, I agree that was, again, there's some truth in some of the things there, but it's like mostly not. And either way, I was totally disinterested in it. I think the only thing that's interesting about it now is how different the media landscape is now, where like a thing like that happening today, which is what's kind of happening, is going very differently because the powers that be are totally reshuffled. And that I think has interesting ramifications. But I think so you're talking about that guy, Mark Kern, I think his name is, who was the producer of the original World of Warcraft and everything like that. And I don't mind. I mean, I'm not, like, it is what it is. We have to talk about these people openly. Is like, I appreciate that he is willing and wants to fight this fight. That's totally his prerogative. I just personally don't think this is an unbiased messenger. And I don't think it's like he's the right arbiter to be having these conversations, because we need more objectivity and I think a better reading of games, generally speaking. And I was noting with Jaffe recently when I was on with him about, he said something specifically about how Helldivers 2, I think he used the term is anti-political or whatever. And I'm like, that's such a strange reading of that because I think Helldivers 2, I mean, it's overtly political. So I think what he might be saying is it's like, it's anti-political in that it is surface like level. But I'm like, it is really deeply political, and the allegory is
classic sense.
Well, I think it's not allegorical, right? I mean, the one thing I talk to people about a lot about politics, right, is that we use that word too broadly. I have an issue, when I do have an issue, is with polemics, with allegories, with things that are directly associated with some current topic of the day, right? If Tears of the Kingdom did wind up having an entire sequence on climate change and talking about Greta or whatever, I wouldn't love that. That wouldn't be a great experience for me.
I like how we can't get past that article, but yeah, for sure.
It's too much.
When you talk about Helldivers is obviously political in broad strokes. It's talking about things like military-industrial complex and the takeover of citizenry to be a military force in the galaxy. It calls Earth Super Earth, for God's sakes. Obviously political in broad strokes, but so is Star Wars in broad strokes. It's that when you attach it to, they must be talking about Trump, they must be talking about the Vietnam War, that's when I start getting a little bit not as happy about my video gaming experience. And I think that's the difference between political and allegorical to me. It's like, you can be as political as you want. I've always said in video games and media, I want you to tell stories that involve societies or organizations or politics as we might think of them. But I want it to work inside your universe. And if you take an aside and then say something about my world that doesn't work within the world you created, I'm going to hate every minute of it.
That's so interesting. I understand your argument, but I disagree with that, because I think it's cool when, like, to me, Helldivers 2 is an allegorical reference, in my opinion, to American military culture specifically. Not about, like, the United States or anything like that, but about the war machine. And I think so. Anyway, it doesn't matter, because that's a totally different conversation. But I love Helldivers, and we can talk about it all day. But I guess the point I'm making is, like, I don't look at someone making that sort of argument about, like, being like, this is the anti-political game. It's like, no, it isn't. And that's like telling me 2 + 2 is 5 or something. It's like, well, if you believe that about that, then you and I look at things so radically different that I don't feel like, from my perspective, you have much effect as a messenger. So I just don't want, it's very similar to the way I feel about Sweet Baby, where it's like, I have no interest in driving them out of the industry. I have no interest in them not doing business. I believe in free association and doing what you want to do. And so if companies want to contract with Sweet Baby, or if people want to listen to a Mark Kern, that's totally fine with me. I just feel like we need to find better warriors to fight a much more meaningful cultural battle that I think is culminating in lots of different spaces in our lives, in which there seemed to be no one fighting the good fight from a decent perspective, in my opinion, or a sensible perspective. Whether we're talking about politics, we're talking about the entertainment industry, we're talking about whatever, games, everything seems so extreme.
What would you consider that good fight to be?
It's an interesting question. Jaffe and I were having a talk about my perspective as a conservative, which is unusual, I think, for conservatives, that, as an example, I believe affirmative action should have existed for a long period of time. Like, a lot of people would be like, oh, this should never have been, and I'm like, no. Post-war, post-Jim Crow and all that, we needed to have affirmative action to make sure that these things were fixed and send things into a cultural momentum towards egalitarianism, where things would even out, right? So the good fight, in my opinion, is to fight a fight that, and this is one of my bullet points, so again, you set me up wonderfully. You're like my Andy Richter. we need to get away from this notion of immutable characteristics, in my opinion, mattering. And I feel like a lot of the problems in our industry today, and why I think it is scapegoating, but there's also a kernel of truth to the political through line with the way everyone in positions of power think, with rare exception. When I brought up Kingdom Come Deliverance, that's a rare studio that's like, no, we're clearly conservative. We don't give a fuck what you think and whatever. There's clearly a through line in thought, and there's clearly a hive mind that tries to control that in the games industry. I just think that I don't know if it's active any more than a hive mind is active, but it tries to get towards some level of equilibrium for itself. And it's trying to get towards this, in my opinion, progressive equilibrium. So the good fight to me is to try to like remove notions that you're born a certain way and you're born in a certain country and all of these kinds of things have a real bearing on the fiction that you should consume or even create. And I just think that we've come into a sort of intersectional nightmare in the games industry. I do think that is real. And that's the good fight, is trying to kind of remove that so that people of all walks of life are welcome. And there are games for everyone, and there are games for everyone already. It's not like we don't already live there, but that it doesn't resort down to who a person's like, this is a black writer and this protagonist is gay. And it's like, and this person's a immigrant and all this. I'm like, what? Like, I'm just here for the fiction. I feel like at some point we're getting too immutable and too strange. It's actually funny, Hogue. It kind of goes into what you're saying. It's like, it's too real world. It's like, I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons, for Christ's sake. Like, what are we talking about? Well, and if that makes sense to you, Jason, I don't know if it does, but that to me is the good fight, to normalize an equilibrium, not like the one we're seeking now as an industry, but rather one that I think brings forth an egalitarianism that doesn't look at your skin color or your gender or anything.
Yeah, I have thoughts, but Gene, go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, this is one thing I have issue with you call it, because it's like, wouldn't you? But I know you have issue with the phrase lived experience, and I also have the same issue too, because it's very redundant, right?
Right, it's just experience.
But yeah, it's a silly. But let's just call it experience, right? Mm-hmm. So, but wouldn't you want to play a game where Miles Morales actually does have an accurate, so to speak, exaggerated swagger of a black teen, like would you want a Miles Morales the issue with Spider-Man 2 is that it's clearly written by a bunch of white people. Like that's the thing. I think that's a real big issue. And I feel like if Spider-Man 2 was more authentically like an actual like black experience or whatever, it wouldn't have been so cringe, So there's a tweet by Dixerto, right? That just happened the other day, and they had a GIF of the two characters in Dragon's Dogma giving each other a high five, right? And then they called it dabbing, and it's like, okay, but if we actually had like a real black dude or someone who is familiar with black culture running Dixerto account, they wouldn't have called it dabbing, which is the motion you do with your hands and your shoulders. You would call it dapping, which is a high five or a fist bump, So like, wouldn't you don't you look at something like that and be like, you know what, that was a really, really cringe tweet that could have been better, and that tweet should have been written better with someone that was a little bit more closer to the culture, and it was someone closer with the experience, with the quote unquote lived experience of someone that grew up around that, right?
I don't disagree with that at all.
It goes back to literacy.
Yeah, I don't literacy, of course, like cultural literacy, right?
Right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah, go ahead, Colin. But yeah.
Oh yeah, no. What I was going to say was I don't disagree with you at all, but I also think that that's narrow in the sense that you can look at that as like a writing or a creative. If you look at a development studio as a pie, it's like, okay, so that would affect like kind of the creative of having like the proper energy in a creative product, whatever it is, the dialogue, the representation, getting the flags right, all that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But my point, I guess, to counter that is that, in my opinion, this like drive towards like a diverse workforce for diversity's sake and not for talent's sake or not for the product's sake or whatever, just across the board, I think is misguided, just because I don't think that level of the ability to correct such a huge wrong in dialogue and correct this huge wrong in something mathematical like engineering, for instance, are two different things. So that's why I just think you hire for the project. So when you're hiring a writer, I think you would hire the appropriate writer for that. But that doesn't need to scope to your entire project. Does that make sense?
It does.
Well, for something like Spider-Man, you would have multiple writers. I mean, there's a whole lot of different voices. And then that, so, you know, to your point about saying this is like one of the fights are like looking for something, you know, the proper warriors, let's say, in the fight. I don't really think there's necessarily a fight to be made on a cultural front. It sounds like it all just goes back down to a writing front or even like a verisimilitude front, right? Where it's like, does this make sense in the world of the game that's being created? And then and that's why your bad faith warriors are bad faith warriors, because they're only calling out racial problems. They're only calling out problems with ugly girls. They're only calling out problems with diversity. They're not actually calling out, you know, issues saying like, this is bad writing because X, Y, Z. And they're opening themselves up for racist arguments because it is inherently seemingly racist, well, whether or not they think they are or not.
Well, I agree with you to an extent in this, and also in the sense to reaffirm, like, the whole ugly girl like argument, I don't really get that, because like I personally, first of all, I don't think Aloy's ugly. I didn't think Mary Jane was particularly ugly. Like, these are some you might think they're average looking or whatever, but it's like, I don't need to see only, like, I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and everyone's cute and everyone's beautiful and it's
all
very
very
fun,
anime,
right? And like, that's
the complete
cool.
opposite of ugly people, absolutely.
Right.
Yes.
And that's cool, and I appreciate that, and it's really dope. But I also want a little bit of realism and like what you see in the gritty real world. Like, why does everyone need to be beautiful? Like, why does every woman need to be eye candy? Why does every man need to be fit? I just don't even understand that argument personally. So, and this is what I'm talking about, Jason, about just having weird messengers involved, where it's like, I want to personally, I could be my own messenger, I guess, in the sense that I have a very narrow problem with I just don't understand. And Gene and I have had this conversation in the past. I feel like this focus on immutable characteristics above all else, like, instead of saying I'm a writer, I'm a trans Black writer, whatever, indigenous writer, totally. Whatever. Like, I'm like, that is so boring, in my opinion, because it means nothing to me personally as you being a writer, because I love writers of so clearly I love all sorts of writers, so clearly it has no bearing on anything for me. And I feel like people are using that as their front shield instead of saying, like, this is what I can bring to a creative project. This is like me as a base person. This is who I am and as an individual. And I don't think this is necessarily negative. And I know people say this. I say this as a straight white man. It's like, whatever, dude. I don't know that I've ever approached a project or a game in my entire life, or a movie or a film, and been like, man, I really relate to this guy as a white man. You know, it's like, I've related to fucking cartoon characters. I've related to animals, and related to, you know, obviously people of other genders and foreign people and fucking aliens. And to me, so I just feel like it's so close-minded and strangling and regressive to where we should be. So the reason I brought up affirmative action before is because it's like, you set in this cadence of the way things should be, and then you remove those rule sets and let things move forward without any of those barriers, and you come to a much more naturalistic endpoint, in my opinion. So it's not that I never agreed with those things or don't agree that I want to be a colorblind society, but it doesn't mean we don't see color. We see it, we know it. So it's a matter of acting affirmatively in your own life now, as opposed to having the rule set necessary to guide you along the way. And I just think that that's progress. So anything that seeks to go in the other direction, I feel like is regressive. And then I think a lot of the arguments, frankly, are people noticing this. And I can't help but notice that. I think it's true. Maybe people will disagree. It sounds like you have something you want to get in here, Jason.
Well, Gene was going to say something. Sorry. I think he's got something on the tip of his tongue, but I'll jump in afterwards. Yeah.
Well, real quick, to your point, Colin, there is something that I don't know. Have you guys heard of the cartoonist Stone Toss?
Yeah, I know him.
Yeah, so he was Stone Toss is a cartoonist, and he's in the news right now because he was getting doxxed, and Elon Musk is trying to protect him. But he was getting doxxed because I guess he's a Nazi or whatever. I haven't really looked that deeply into it. I guess he has some Nazi with dog whistles or whatever. So whatever. But he did have a cartoon about Akira Toriyama, and the cartoon, the first panel showed a girl looking at the Black Little Mermaid and says, "Mom, look, this is so great, isn't it?" And then then the second panel is Goku just charging up, and then you see a crowd of thousands of like brown children being like, "Yeah," you know, and people hated him for that comic, right? I saw that comic and I was like, "Yeah, that's actually accurate," you know. I didn't know who he was or anything like that. and people started doxing him for that. But to his point, my friend Juan Bremer, who's a gay, very leftist, communist, socialist writer, wrote the exact same thing in the Los Angeles Times when he wrote about Goku and his impact in Mexico and Latin America. And he says, I look at Goku as a patron saint of any time there's a boardroom that's trying to capture the Latino experience and the Latino experience in the story. When all we really want is a good character and someone who's really strong and looks out for the family and likes to eat good food. And there's Goku right there. You know, right. Akira Toriyama didn't do anything at all about how to reach out to the Latino community or the Latino audience. He just made a good story, and it turned out to be the greatest story ever, and it was a global hit. So that's to your point.
Greatest story ever, but it's a good. But I'm glad you like it. But Jason, get in here.
Yeah, the only other point I was going to bring up was that I don't disagree with what you're saying and putting qualifiers on everything. And in a way, it works to the detriment of certain people and almost saying, we found a good example of this, if I'm going to take it politically, is Biden appointing a Supreme Court justice and him saying, I'm going to make sure I appoint a Black woman justice. It's like, cool, that's fine. But now but why did you say that instead of just saying, I'm going to appoint a Supreme Court justice and then have the result be this Black woman? Because then that implies she's the most qualified of everybody, instead of putting the stipulation of saying, oh, you're the most qualified Black woman, because that was the initial criteria.
So Biden did say that first, huh? He said that out loud first, right?
Yeah, he said that. And I'm summing this, and I'll just expose myself here as like, I lean left. I voted for Biden, happy to do it. I'll do it again. And that was really stupid. Like, happy to criticize both sides, because the extremes of both sides are really, they're problematic in their own rights. And that gets to your point, Colin, of saying, you put those stipulations on, and it's like, what does that add to the conversation? Nothing, when you're ultimately trying to find the best of the best. So I think you can still find those people that bolster unheard voices. I think that's a good thing to have, but it's going to be more organic, because you have these people who are, or at least were, definitely underrepresented, and you need these forces kind of promoting them, say, no, these people are good, these people work, etc. And then, but that's just how the pendulum works. You need to have like almost a level. Sometimes you need this sort of extreme progressivism. And yes, at this point, there's certainly points that have gone way too far in order to get back to a middle point where stuff comes out in the wash and you just get quality. But if the key argument, to bring it back to the point, is, hey, this company's ruining games, well, how are they ruining games that are actually detrimental to the game itself? And then you ask yourself, is that because of these writers, or is it because of the game developers themselves? And that's ultimately, I'll stop there.
Yeah, that's well said.
Well, I want to jump in for just one, maybe 2 points. One, I want to synthesize what Colin and Gene were saying just a little bit, because Gene's example of getting the terminology wrong for the high five, I noted, was not Gene saying that you needed a person of a specific culture or racial background to get the term right, just that you want to get the term right, right? And so I think, Colin, I think we can synthesize those two positions to saying it doesn't matter what the tagline individualistically might be for the various groups that a person could be in, if they have that cultural closeness and are useful to the writing process, right? I think this comes back to being able to tell good writing from bad, and people telling it and not really knowing why, right? I have this conversation with my wife a lot when we watch movies, and that is, did you like that movie, honey? And her saying, I didn't, but I don't know why, or I did, but I don't know why, and really kind of diving into that. I love to do postmortems. I do them on my channel, and I love to critically analyze how stories work. And I think that video games, journalism, media, and maybe even gamers, in terms of literacy for their chosen medium of choice, is not terribly high level, right? So you say Sweet Baby Inc. is destroying these games, and you don't know why exactly, and it comes out as racist because they're adding racial elements into various games, but you know something's wrong, right? And my hope is that you can look at something like the way Spider-Man 2 tells its story, the way some other games tell their stories, and say, this is why this story doesn't work, and get a higher level of criticism in games media in general, because the critical class for games didn't grow up doing analysis like film critics. And movies have a different background, but video games are now kind of approaching that same background as movies. And a lot of them are built around the notion of presenting a narrative, a compelling story of some kind. Mm-hmm. Many of Sony's games, for instance, are focused on that first and foremost. And so I think we do need better kind of story critics in video games to have that kind of position to explain why something is working or not working, and to grade a little bit more on that, the holistic experience of playing one of these games and whether it's worth 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 hours of your time. Mm-hmm. And I think you might get some of that warrior aspect that you're looking for, Colin, although I think I reject the notion of needing warriors on this. I think the tendency to create a culture war or to advocate for warriors is what creates some of this noise. I think what you said earlier, Colin, about being for free association is probably the right direction here. Sweet Baby Inc. detected as a concept, separating out whatever's happening at Kiwi Farms or any harassment or whatever's happening there, that's all rightly derided. But as a concept, I'm going to find this company's involvement in games and I'm going to not buy them alone is what we should want as part of the conversation. And you can fight that by buying the game yourself if you think it's wrong. You can have that kind of response. That's what we expect from consumer boycotts. It's how we expect this to work. So I think overall, conceptually, that was right. And separate from anything else happening, that's, I think, where you get some of the backlash and some of the broadening of the scope of this conversation is the media coming down so hard on the notion that you can just identify a company that you don't like and not buy their products is a part of the problem. And that's warrioring on the other side. But anyway you look at this, I think that kind of cultural fighting ends up in a bad place. And so I do think that we want people to be able to identify what it is that they don't like about something, hopefully with media and critical help. And then when they do identify that, we want them to say, okay, I'm not going to buy things from those people that make these things, and to not just castigate them and throw them out into a black hole and say these people are all bad or racist or evil or what have you.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, and the media jumping in and defending it predictably is very predictable behavior, as Colin even implied earlier, right? It just feeds into the storyline and conspiracy of there's a cabal that everyone's in what Colin has said, lockstep or goose stepping in terms of just following the message, right? And it's ridiculous, it looks ridiculous.
Yeah, it does. And it goes back to
that's universal.
Yeah.
You can draw those points in anything that happens.
Exactly.
So you think I'm surprised that someone said DEI was the reason that boat hit the bridge in Maryland? No. No. I knew someone was going to say it.
Yeah.
Usually that stuff was strictly reserved for parody, but now people actually believe it.
Right.
Yeah. No, but it's everywhere too. It's real. Just yesterday, the University of Texas at Austin eliminated diversity DEI staff positions and closed the departments. Focus on access and belonging on campus to comply with the state's anti-DEI law, or SB 17, that bans public colleges and universities from maintaining DEI offices, holding mandatory DEI training, and having departments focus on promoting differential treatment based on race, sex, or ethnicity. So
yeah, I personally
think that's a whole movement going on right now too.
Yeah, that happened in Florida too. I personally think that's great.
Florida too as well.
Just because I think, like I said, it's time to turn that faucet off now. The faucet needed to be on. Now it doesn't. And I surprised Jaffe and I were having an interesting conversation about this where I was like, I was surprised him because I was like, did you know that Fortune 500 companies from 2002 to 2022 to 2023, a quarter of their hiring was black? And he's like, that's great. And I'm like, yeah, that's awesome. But that's also twice per capita, like black population of America, right? And he's like, so what's the problem? And I'm like, well, there's no problem inherently in that. It's just that when we shake it all up, right, and we let it all settle, workforces, right? So you might have like a very, like the NFL or the NBA, where you'd have like a very minority driven workforce, but then you'd have something like that was very white or whatever. But when you shook it all up, hopefully it just evens out to exactly what the population is like per capita. And anything that over or undershoots that is inherently wrong. Like it's not fixable from a legislative point of view. You have to simply let it even out, net out. You have the laws of protection. It's already illegal to do all these things anyway. And that's what's so surprising to me about the DEI stuff is that a lot of this stuff seems illegal. And I think, Hogue, you would agree with that. Like they've gotten so bold with some of this stuff where it's like, I'm pretty sure like white people also have civil rights. I know that this is a strange thing to like kind of put into words, but like people don't think about that. It's like we have to actually all be, why wouldn't we want to live in a civilization where everyone is treated equally? But nonetheless, I have no problem with any of this stuff. I just think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Hogue.
don't know. I think some of the reporting here gets a little bit confused as between the United States and Europe. Europe has a few different rules on these various things. But yes, in general, regardless of what Kotaku editors or writers might say in their Twitter profiles, it's illegal to discriminate on the basis of race in any direction.
Right, exactly. And so like I've always found it weird. It's like we're looking for black writers at this. It's like why are you looking for black? Anyway, like whatever. We've gotten into all of this already. Right? Just I think you.
I mean, you shouldn't have to just look for writers and then just pick the black person if you want them. You know,
right?
Like just say. It goes back to what Jason was saying. It's like Biden. Why are you saying that? Just say that you're going to hire a judge and then just pick the one that you want. You know,
right?
You don't. None of this will have to happen. You know.
Well, because the thing that bothers me about it is simply that whether or not so like Kajani Brown Jackson, the Supreme Court justice, it's like she could very well be the most brilliant person in the world. I don't know anything about her, but why would you give anyone an opportunity to attack the choice from that point of view? And then those people that made the choice get mad that everyone notices it. See, that's the thing that bothers me. It's like clearly it's going to be a reasonable question to ask someone if you're in a DEI structure situation where race and gender and sexuality are of the utmost importance if they're in those positions because of that. I'm sorry, that's a reasonable thing to observe, which is why, in my opinion, and I think I've had this conversation with you, Gene, where it's like, wouldn't you as a person who's not white want to remove all of that aura so that people around you know exactly how you got your job, right? That to me,
I mean, that's who I am. Right. I am the only non-white culture critic at the Washington Post. But also, I don't care because I made it, you know. So
right, exactly.
You know.
So that's my point of view. But whatever, it doesn't matter. The other thing I wanted to say before we go on to the next inquiry: do you guys have more time? By the way, I know I don't want to hold you here forever, Jason. Especially you have a real job.
I have a real job too, man. Come on.
I kicked back some time. I could probably do like another 10 minutes.
Okay. Well, I'll get this in, and then what are you? How are you guys looking, Hogan? And
I'm okay.
Okay.
I am a little bit offended by the notion that I don't have a real job.
He's probably got the most real job of any of us.
Just because we're not gamers, you know?
Oh my God. I didn't mean like that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend anyone. I meant more like you don't work for yourself.
I am joking.
Okay, fair.
I tell you my real title, and now you think I have a real job.
I know we're fucking with you, man.
The final things I wanted to say were about this before we move on, and we'll say goodbye to Jason, and then we'll continue with just the three of us. Is I just don't understand also why it has to be so ham-fisted. Jaffe and I were laughing about the image that comes from Suicide Squad, where it's like all people are welcome, and it's like the gay pride flag and the trans flag and like all of this crazy shit. And we were hysterical laughing about it because I'm like, what is this? Like, this is cringy. The kind of shit people are talking about. Like, stop.
That is the kind of shit that people are talking about. It's fucking cringe. So people are... There's a scene in the end of Marvel's Endgame or Infinity War where it's just all women superheroes, and it just all clearly focused as like, this is the girl shot, this is the girl boss shot, you know. And it's like that kind of pandering that I think people are wisening up to, you know. And that's a backlash to it, you know, because it's fucking awful, you know.
And yeah, so the ham-fistedness, I just think getting rid of that and just doing away with that creative ham-fistedness generally, I think would go a long way towards ameliorating this problem. Because, for instance, if you look at it, and I think it is deeply inclusive to have the deaf black girl or deaf Hispanic girl, whatever she is in Spider-Man, but I liked it and it felt natural and cool. Like, I was like, this doesn't feel, this feels anti-ham-fisted.
Yeah, Haley's cool. Yeah, no problem with Haley. She was in the first game, so it's fine.
Right, exactly. She was great.
Yeah.
And I liked playing.
First game was great too,
I don't know if it's a spoiler. I don't want to say it. Anyway. And the other thing that I wanted to say before we move on is just, I don't like reducing certain or many people to like to what people say about them, because they do that about me. A lot of people do that about me. You hear something about a person and then you assume the worst about them. So it was brought up earlier, like the CEO of Sweet Baby Inc. Maybe Jason, you brought up maybe not as bad. Kim Belair, I think her name is. And I've seen some of these names bandied around, and I'm like, I really don't have any opinions on some of these people, but I must say that there is one person that has come up where I'm like, oh no, that person is straight up racist. It was her name, I brought it up, is Katie Robinson, and people can look her up, but she has a Twitter account or whatever. And I was like, I know this person. How do I know this person? When people had been bandying around, she's the community manager of Compulsion, which was brought up earlier. And I was like, I'm like, I know this person because people are like, oh, she's racist and this and that or whatever. And I'm like, how do I? So I went and searched and I'm like, oh, she is racist. We had an encounter in 2021 where she was tweeting, and I actually put it all on the web archive back at the time because I was like, well, she's going to delete this shit. Where she had like and it's like, I'm not offended. I'm not trying to say I'm offended by it. I'm just saying it's racist. Is like an image of like someone spraying "Crackers Be Gone," like a spray that says "Crackers Be Gone," saying, I was wondering why I had so many mayo in my mentions and all of this kind of stuff. Image that says "Boohoo Cracker, I don't care," and all of this kind of stuff. I'm like, so I don't know a lot of the individuals involved in this, and I'm not willing to like cast stones at them, but that Katie Robinson person, definitely racist. Like, definitely racist. I knew I encountered this person at some point. And it's crazy to me. So I went and looked her up, and it's not to offend anyone about like, these are all honest jobs. It's just like, she was a sales associate, a service coordinator, wellness consultant, cocktail server, museum curator, bartender, receptionist, property manager, and all of these things, and then finds her way somehow into the community management position at Compulsion Games. Why would you have someone in that position that has so much baggage when they don't even bring anything? It's not like, oh, she had this amazing background doing this thing, we need to have her on board. It's like, she's just your average worker who happens to be specifically racist. And then you gleam on to her, and then you expect people again not to notice. You can do whatever you want. I'm not asking you to fire her. It's just like, I want to say, like, while I can't speak to the experiences of a lot of people are having with some of these people, I can speak to that person. I knew I recognized that name. And to me, that's, I don't know. You have something to say, Jason? It looks like you might want to get in here.
No. One, I don't have to go, which is great.
Oh, great.
So
okay, cool.
I just punted that call so I can hang out. I was just wondering, this kind of goes back to, I have no opinion on her. She was referencing another tweet. I tried to see her post. They don't exist anymore because I don't follow her and unapprove. So I'm not going to go through that effort. So I don't have any opinion of that. But as a community manager for Compulsion, I think you guys had a similar talk about this on Sacred, which was why does Compulsion Games have a community manager? Wouldn't that just be someone at Microsoft at this point? Like, what are they saying? They're not saying anything about their game. We haven't heard anything.
I doubt it's a full-time job or anything like that, but I
agree. Yeah. But it's kind of interesting that that's the association.
But that was the point I was making, is like, this is a journeyman. This is a traveler. Like I've been saying, It's not like, what's a good example? I don't know. You have like someone with major baggage, but they're so good that it's like, we got to have this person. It's like, this person has no experience in this industry and is racist. So I like it, and it's weird to me that I think David Sears is over there at Compulsion Games now, who has been bouncing around for a long time, and it's like, has anyone asked them, like, what is this? Like, what is this? This is weird. Why would you want this person as your community manager? I was wondering why I had so many mayo in my mentions.
I can talk about
Woohoo Cracker.
I can talk about white racism, and it goes back to the messenger conversation we were talking about, and Ho talked about it earlier too, about Alyssa Mercante replying, "You can't be racist against white people. Thanks for playing. Goodbye." Right? That's not a good way to send that message. Because it's just very abrupt and it doesn't explain anything, and it sounds racist, right? But here I'm gonna read out from the Alberta Civil Liberties Recreation Center. This is Canadian,
Alberta,
so bear with me.
Okay,
yeah, Alberta, but
it's a Canadian company. That makes sense.
While assumptions and stereotypes about white people do exist, this is considered racial prejudice, not racism. Racial prejudice refers to a set of discriminatory or derogatory attitudes based on assumptions derived from perceptions about race and or skin color. So thus, racial prejudice can indeed be directed at white people, but is not considered racism because of the systemic relationship to power.
Right, which is an academic definition.
Which is an academic definition of it.
Okay,
right?
so at the very least,
I think it's fair to bring up the dictionary definition of it, because that is the broader general understanding of racism.
So at the very least, this person is prejudiced. Let's say, right?
Yes,
openly.
I think you can easily say that, even within that context of that they are racially prejudiced against white people.
So then it should be asked, like, why? Because she's not hiding it. It's not even like, it's like, say what you want behind the closed doors. I'm not trying to like break your door down, and I'm not trying to also get in your mind and parse out like exactly how you feel about everything. But when you're that comfortable vocalizing it, that to me is real power, to be honest with you. I mean, you want to talk about like systemic power and like the ability to like wield it. That's power, man. Like, I couldn't wield that power. Gene, you wouldn't be able to wield that power either.
No, I couldn't.
It goes without saying that Hogan, Jason couldn't either. I mean,
my sincere hope is that
do you agree though, rather, that that's a powerful stance to be able to say that kind of shit and not even pay a consequence for it is, and then I'm the one who's supposed to be in the powerful position. I don't know about that. I don't know about that at all.
I mean, she could still lose her job, so there's that. So
I doubt she's going to. Like, she's not going to lose her job. You know.
Yeah, I will say I just don't fundamentally agree with that definition.
I'm sorry.
Right?
Go ahead.
I don't agree with that definition on power. I don't think being an ist of any kind is related to your systematic power. It's based on how you feel about other individuals and whether or not you feel like they are less than you because of some characteristic that they hold.
Yeah, I think being from my own definition, racist, and then being able to work in the mainstream games industry and to make no apologies and make no reference to it. I think it's interesting, you know, like that's, I don't know.
Gene, I gotta call you out because I think you've actually used the term. You and I, our game tastes are actually like almost identical. I am a huge Yakuza fan. And you actually use the term racism when talking about the Korean racism in the Yakuza series. Exactly. So wouldn't that qualify or not?
It would qualify because is Japanese culture. The Japanese are the dominant culture in Japan. So you can be racist against Koreans.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
Because they do hold the levers of power in Japan. And Japan is culturally homogenous and culturally and ethnically homogenous. So
Japan's culture
that's like without doubt. Like the Japanese people are the superior race in Japan. So.
But you can see how functionally this gets into a kind of ranking scenario.
Yes.
I don't think is a good idea.
It gets messy because like I'm from Hawaii, and Hawaii is under the federal government. So technically, the white systems of powers are still there in Hawaii, but at a micro level, I have absolutely seen Hawaiians be super racist against other races and use those same levers of power to their advantage to disenfranchise, for example, the Micronesian people who are basically from other islands and they are darker skinned. They are the black people of the Pacific Islands. And they're absolutely racially targeted like in Hawaii by non-whites, by Hawaiians, you know. So I absolutely believe that people of color can and will be racist against other people. No doubt. We're humans.
Don't be racist.
We're super racist, dude.
Don't be racist, kids.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that simple.
Good advice.
It's just that. Advice. I mean, it is.
You're super racist. Don't be racist. Anyways, thanks for coming to Last Stand Media.
We solved it. We did it. Yeah. Good work, everybody.
All right, we can go through these other ones more quickly, but because we've answered some of this stuff, but I wanted to get to these inquiries. 3, I wrote to the email to you guys. What don't enthusiasts understand about the industry that they need to? This could pertain to the creation of games, publishing, coverage, and journalism, etc. Jason, I know you were eager to talk about this, and we were originally going to. I had asked you originally, do you want to spin off and just talk about this? But we thought this would be better in this conversation in the context. Like, I do think that there is a major problem that people have about not understanding how games are made. And I think we've all been somewhat blessed. I mean, I can say from my own perspective, Jason by far has the most hands-on experience, but just being a journalist and going to studios and writing their stories and learning and seeing games as they go, you really garner a lot of information about how games are made. And I was in the industry for a long time, and then now I own a studio. So we ship games, and they're not the biggest games in the world, so I have some level of understanding of how games are made, but there's still many things I don't understand, I'm sure. So I imagine that the average person that plays games, because it's such a bespoke and interesting industry, it's not like making a film, which we can fundamentally understand how that happens from beginning to end. I don't think a lot of people even visualize or are able to visualize how games are made. So do you feel like there's a lot that people don't understand?
Yeah, totally. And I think that I kind of got down to a small part of it when it comes to writing consultants. But one of the things that I do here at Atari is actually I manage a lot of the third-party publishing services. So when a developer needs support because they have deficiency, and I don't mean that as a bad thing. It's like you might work with a team of 10 people and that's not enough to do everything. Then you find other teams to help support those projects to fill in the gaps. That could be finding a writer. That could be finding we're about to ship Lunar Lander. That's a great example, right? That comes out later this year. We wanted to add some more production value to the game. So what did we do? Well, we found a company through another agent who hooked us up with a video production house in South Africa to make cutscenes for the game. The name of that company is Bewilder, and they did awesome work. These like 90s style cartoon cutscenes to bolster the production quality of the game that was not done by the developer Dreams Incorporated, but Dreams Incorporated is the name that's on the box. When we talk about the game, we're talking about it's published by Atari, it's developed by Dreams Incorporated. Those are the two entities that people most associated with it. But there are way more other parties involved. Like I said, you have Bewilder, who's doing the cutscenes. You have Roboto, who's a company in Poland that's doing QA, localization QA. You have Andivar, who's a company that's coordinating all the VO in the game, which we added as well later on. And then there's so a lot of games are not just made by these key entities that people associate with making the games. They're a group effort, oftentimes by multiple parties involved that you've never even heard of and never will hear about. One of the biggest companies in the industry is a company called Keywords that I bet none of these guys you talk to on Twitter would ever hear of them. Yet they are actually one of the biggest companies in the entire industry and largely provide a lot of stuff like XDev, QA services, localization services, porting services. They have locations all around the world. They are massive and no one even knows they exist. But yet they're working to actually prop up a lot of the games that people are playing thinking that they're made by somebody else when maybe they're led by somebody else, but they're not entirely done by those parties or not solely done by those parties. So that was ultimately going to be my thesis of taking it from the development or publishing side of things.
Yeah, when I've tried to instruct the audience over the years, people ask, like, why hasn't this thing been updated yet? Or where's this patch? Or why can't they fix this?
Yeah.
And I don't always know the answer. And I think sometimes devs are lazy or latent with things that they should update. I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to let them off the hook, but generally speaking, I try to tell people there's always like some weird reason, dude. Like there's just so many fucking moving parts, and I've experienced it now firsthand so many times about how things conflict and how projects get out of control and become way bigger than they're supposed to be, and you need to start going outside. I mean, with our role-playing game that we're making, it's like it's a fucking nightmare, of art. Like it's literally art. Like we need all of these art assets. We're like farming them basically from people, and it's become much bigger and more expensive than we thought, and all of this kind of stuff. And just scope that out many times to these bigger companies, and you realize how quickly things can get out of control. So it's not that I don't understand that people want bang for their buck. They want to be treated well as a customer. They want high quality products. You deserve products out of the box that work and all of that. But as things are added and fixed and all of the rest, and they learn about things about games that they didn't learn about in dev environments and in QA environments and all of that, just got to be a little patient, because it's harder than it seems. I mean, that's just one of the major things I try to relay to people. It's way harder than it looks.
Yeah. And on that point about QA, the bigger the game becomes, the more QA is required to make sure it's functional, right? Like you're going to find that with the role-playing game. I mean, I saw it firsthand because I worked on some of the absolute tiniest games that we've done, which are the recharge games. Those you QA those in about a month. You're done. That's it. But Sweet. You're going to make a game that's a lot larger than that, that you intend to sell for, $20, $30, $40. Yeah, you're going to want to spend a lot more than 1 month to QA those games, and you're going to need more people to really kick the tires and make sure, and running it through its paces to make sure you get the most functional product to the end consumer.
Yeah, I was going to say I don't know what we're going to do with the role playing game, because it's not even going to come out this year, I don't think. But we have basically QA'd our game and just tested it by sending it to people and literally having our friends tell us, like, this is broken. And we still I think we've discovered things about our game after we launched them that we didn't know every time since Twin Breaker, probably. Mm-hmm. And such frustrating, obnoxious things where I'm like, I cannot fucking believe that this is the reason that this thing is broken. So like things where like stages will loop if you finish in a certain position, or if you fight the last boss on the normal difficulty, then you could just automatically fight them on the hard difficulty and then you get the trophy and like all these things. And we're like, God almighty, and we fixed them. Oh, sometimes hot fixes, sometimes patched quickly. And I don't know. It's just, I have so much more inborn patience in me after experiencing these things. And by the way, I'm barely involved in a lot of this shit because I'm basically just the owner and writer of these games or whatever. So it's like these guys are in the trenches dealing with all this bullshit. It sucks,
Yeah, and you could do as much QA as you want. Still, your largest sample size is going to be the public when you release the game. Mm-hmm. So inevitably, they're going to find some stuff because no matter how many ways you think somebody can play the game, there's always going to be that one weirdo who plays it in a different way.
Totally. No, that's absolutely true. I mean, we've learned about overpowered weapons and like ways people play games we didn't even think about. And I don't really know how to account for that other than hiring one of these firms and hoping for the best. But I don't think we're going to do that anyway. But
I honestly think that's why a lot of the games I play that even people are saying are really buggy, I don't find buggy because I generally I just play games along like kind of the straight path, and then I'll do some side quests along the way. But I'm not actually trying to break any games I play. I just want to play the game that they're giving me, and that's what I do.
Yeah, I'm playing. Like I said, I'm playing Rebirth, and I'm in the second major area now or whatever. And both times I'm in the area, I'm like, oh God, because like I can't play the normal like the golden path. Like I know I need to do everything. I know what you mean. I have to do it all. Like I have to, and I have to do it all first.
Oh, it's the wrong game for you to do that.
This game is going to kill you, dude.
I'm 25%.
I was worried this was going to happen. I was really, really worried. I was like, I'm not sure if Colin can help himself.
I completed all of the
appreciate the extra 3 weeks of lead time.
I completed all the grassland section before I moved on to like the next section. And now I'm in the Junon section, and now I'm completing all of that before I move on.
Look, it'll save you some time like it did for me on one side quest at the end. So that's one good thing.
It's just, I'm broken in that way. Like I'm incapable of playing games in that way. So I do.
Anyways, you'll see the spoiler cast in 3 months, kids.
Yeah.
So.
Wow. Dude, the mini games, I am like Ben Affleck outside smoking a cigarette every time I come to a new mini game where it's like, I'm like, because then I have to do it like really well, to like get all the materia or whatever you're gonna get for it. So it's like, oh my God, I'm playing
I was
playing the piano for 90 fucking minutes last night, probably.
Oh, dude, you are so fucked, Colin. Holy shit. Wow.
Oh man.
Because I realized to get a star rating, you basically have to play it perfectly.
Oh no.
Yeah. And I was like, dude, this has 400 notes. I missed 3 of them and I didn't get a star. Like, are you kidding? And I think Micah wanted to like kill herself at some point because it's the same song over and over again. Anyway, all right, Gene, let's stick with you. So we got some of that perspective from development, from publishing, valuable stuff from Jason. I wonder, what don't enthusiasts understand about the industry that they need to? We can talk more about the publishing and development of games, but I was thinking more from coverage and journalism. If there's anything you think maybe people don't understand. I'll give you an example. One of the things that I think people don't understand, and I've said this so many ad infinitum at this point, right? Like, is it's not like what's going on behind the scenes is not like what you think. Like people think there's like major payola and fucking all sorts of crazy money being exchanged and all that. I'm like, it's really not. I mean, I can only speak for IGN, I guess, and maybe my time at IGN, but it's not that way at all. When ads appear on sites, we had no idea. When someone bought, like my Mass Effect 3 review was purchased by EA. That was really brilliant by our sales team. And I got a lot of shit for that, but I'm like, I didn't know that. Like, I didn't know that was going to happen, And so I think that a lot of I would always say, don't assume the worst because it's just not going down like that. And it would suggest such a conspiracy with a bunch of man children, by the way, that would never be able to keep that secret that just assume it's not what you think behind the scenes. So that's my example for you.
I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. And just to jump off that point, I know that it looks like that it's a total conspiracy, that everyone has the same message about DEI and Sweet Baby and blah, blah, blah. I know it looks like that. It really, really does look like that. I wish it would stop looking like that. But I assure you that there is no like organized like corporation, IGN, GameSpot, Kotaku, cabal to do all this. The very simple explanation is that all of these people are friends with each other. And there are group chats. Absolutely. There's absolutely group chats. They're talking about me in the group chats. And I'm friends with a lot of these folks too. I love a lot of these folks. Yeah, I mean, so as a friend of these folks, I absolutely, it's part of it's just that they're friends and they just don't want to talk shit on their friends, and they might agree with each other, and that's what something Colin talks a lot about in terms of diversity of thought. Right? There's just not a lot of that because people are absolutely kind of gatekeeping their own communities, and they're just kind of they're kind of just building gated communities within themselves in terms of philosophy of thought and everything. So yeah, it looks like they all agree with each other because they do agree with each other. That's just the long and short of it. Yeah, to Colin's point, there's just not a lot of folks in the journalism industry that might think other ways, because again, we talked about this. You hire who you like and who you know. And that's just a very, very different way of operating in terms of like the regular news. Again, the whole reason why, Colin, you were interested in me specifically is because I did not come from games journalism. I come from regular journalism. So all this level of activism and what Hogue talked about, like all of these opinion pieces, is just like very new to me. Because it definitely feels like that people go into cultural criticism as some kind of form of activism. And that's just not how I was raised on. But I also, again, like they're activists because they want to be activists. That's it. They just
Gene, I'm sorry to admit,
and also I believe that these are good people. Ultimately, I think they have good intentions and they care about people. And so just call them out on the cringe, but just be a little bit easy on them. They're not bad people. They're just cringy.
Yeah, they are a little cringy. I was gonna say I'm sorry to admit. I hired you because I needed an Asian man on the team.
You need to fill the Asian quota. Yeah,
right.
Sure.
There's a specific Asian quota that we needed to fulfill here at my company, and
that's true. That's true. Because
legally, we don't use the word quota.
Okay, fair enough. Our goals.
Goals. Yes, that's right. But yeah, you have your Latin American and Chris, and
right. We have Cog, we have Micah
for
the Black constituency. So we're doing pretty well. I mean, that's what I'm proud of with our company. Not to pat myself on the back, but I guess I will. Is that like by just creating something that I thought was fun and with interesting people that had a diverse set of viewpoints and were good at what they did, we actually have a very racially diverse group of people, like comparable to many, if not almost all, of the groups of games coverage. Like
we just need more women, but that's like every.
I'm sorry to lower your average.
Yeah. Well, what I said was unfortunately, Micah's inclusion is actually even more than our women viewership per capita, because I think it's
I know, per capita,
which is unfortunate.
I will say, I don't hang out with a lot of dudes, so definitely hanging with the Last Stand Media crew is the most like dude contact that I've had. Oh, but
cool. Yeah. Oh. Yeah. So, okay. I'm glad that you and I are on the same page on that, Gene. I thought that was important to come to the defense of that. Is that I don't know, man. Maybe there is payola and crazy shit going on at other places, but I really never saw it. Like I'm not lying to you. There's no reason for me to lie to you. I've told you about all sorts of things.
With the content creators. The content creators are the ones that are getting paid, and they admit it, which is fine.
Right? They're definitely getting paid.
All right. I've taken enough strays.
Well, I think that is funny though. It is true. Like people are given early access. They're flown out to all these exotic places. I was one of those people that did that for a long time, but that money started getting focused on, rightfully so, and wisely, on content creators, YouTubers, Twitch streamers, and so on and so forth. And it is its own level of payola that people shrug off, I guess, because they're not pretending to be some sort of font of wisdom or objectivity, which a lot of these places are. And I think that's
they're just fans, and
right? Exactly.
So that's why they're being rewarded as fans. So I mean, like even in the Final Fantasy community, all my friends are just being flown out to all these beautiful places or going to LA for these lavish like Final Fantasy experiences.
And so I
you can add me to that list whenever you want, Square.
Yeah. It's not. I love being disconnected just because I feel so much less stress. On some hand, it's like stressful to not have access to games, but really it's actually much more stressful to play at your own pace. But I know what it's like on both sides, and I did appreciate that life, but it was different. And Gene, you hit on something really important, which is that I get what it looks like. Like I know what it looks like. I've always been aware of that, and I don't blame people for thinking something. I just think
I don't blame people for thinking it either. Right. I do not. It looks like it. Right. I get it. It looks stupid.
But in reality, my experience, and it's kind of not like this anymore because things have really broken down, but when there were video game websites, like when San Francisco had 7 video game websites or whatever, and people, it's like we were all poor. We were workaholics. We were obsessed with the industry and all that kind of stuff. We were making $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a year living 4 or 5 to an apartment. It wasn't like some glorious thing that like we didn't make a lot of money. I didn't make any money, real money, until I left IGN. You know,
that's not a lot of money even back then too. Yeah, that's not a lot of money in San Francisco,
dude. That's poverty. I tell people and they laugh. Like my dad's like, "Oh my god, you could have probably talked them up." When I talked to Fox when I got my job offer, and then they were like, "All right, so I was 2007. It was May 2007. I was still in Boston." And they're like, "All right, so your salary is going to be $40,000 a year." And before like they even got that out of their mouth, I was like, "Okay." You know, because I like had never seen that much money in my entire life. I was like, oh my God, like what do you do?
Exactly.
With I remember thinking that, like, what do you do when you make $40,000 a year? You know, because I have nothing, like nothing at all. And that was the mentality of everyone. So I think you're right that most of these people, I think some of these people are pricks, but I think most of them are good people. And it is,
I mean, yeah, some of them are pricks, but yeah.
And it is like an in-group, and it is. But don't overestimate the power of it. So a good example, like one of the big Gamergate 1.0 things was that journalist pro list or whatever, that like email list that people were on. And I'm like, I'm not saying I was the best connected person. I wasn't, right? But I was the senior editor of the biggest video game website in the world. And I have no idea what was going on that thing, or like what kind, like no one gave a fuck about what was being said on that thing. It was irrelevant. Like whatever these people were saying behind the scenes had no bearing on.
Oh, so some email list or whatever, right?
Right. Like it was like a mail, and I wasn't on it. I was in some secret groups on Facebook and stuff that I ultimately got kicked out of, like for reviewers and stuff, where you like, it's everyone that could review games at all these different things. You would ask each other for help in games that you were stuck on because there was no help. And I thought that kind of thing was kind of cool. And I definitely utilize that sometimes. But yeah, it's just, I would give most of these people the benefit of the doubt. I would also, and I don't mean this from like a, like you lost situation. I will have my gloating day when Kotaku eventually goes away, but these people know what time it is. It's if you're not at a major outlet or a mainstream outlet like Washington Post, if you're not at a major outlet like IGN, it's basically done in the next year or two for you, I would assume. And you can see what's happening at Kotaku. Like that's inexorably going to happen with guides, and they're going to wash those people out and all the rest. And it's like you're kind of beating them when they're down in some sense. I'm not saying that they don't add to it. Like that woman from Kotaku that said that thing about racism and has just kind of been melting down on Twitter. She's not helping her own case, but there is part of me that honestly feels bad for her at the same time, because she'll probably never work in the industry again, and is being kind of openly and slowly, like glacially, but inexorably and inevitably pushed away. And that's like kind of gets back into one of the things I was thinking is like, these people did a really bad job of cultivating an audience. They don't really have an audience. That the people are either exist to be like, Kotaku doesn't want to sell ads on articles people are going to because they're mad. I think people at some point overestimate the value of clickbait and rage bait. Like Kotaku doesn't want to go to Tide detergent and say like, listen, we have 5 million visitors a month and they hate us. These are the articles that were, it's like that. They don't want to, that's not the way you sell ads. That's not the way you keep CPM up. So it's not a viable model. They don't want to be hated. And I think that Go Media realizes that they've really let the inmates are in charge of the asylum at this point. The tragic thing to me about Kotaku is not that it's going away, but that the people that are there now fumbled it, because it wasn't like this. I wasn't a huge fan of Kotaku, but it was a reputable and interesting place to go 10 years ago. And when all of the people that were talented left, or most of the people that were talented left, that was the end. And then the people that are ruining it for everyone else and like ruining it generationally, and it's going to go away and it's worthless at this point, are the ones that complain most loudly. That's the thing that I find ironic and strange. So it's not like everything's good. That's just my opinion, though. Neither here nor there. All right. Hope, let's go to you with this question. I was thinking you can hit this from any angle, but of course we could talk about the legal angle, but I was thinking about the business angle as well, money, economics. But what don't enthusiasts understand about the industry that they need to?
Well, on this particular topic, I like to talk about consultants and the notion that these companies are going and seeking out help that they have decided that they need, right? That we've talked about this a little bit prior in this video, but that hiring a Sweet Baby Inc., hiring anybody of that Stripe or to consult on any aspect of your video game from a business perspective is driven by the money. It's driven by the people that are paying the budgets or signing the checks. And so when you see Sweet Baby Inc. is involved in a game, that means that the company that's making that game wanted them to be involved. And I think some people kind of know this, and some people think, I at least fashion from my understanding of what I've seen on the internet, that they're rolling in like a gang and saying, nice game here, be a shame if anything were to happen to it. And that's not really how this works in practice, right? And so I do think that that's important to understand. The other thing I always relay to people is that businesses, no matter how big, are still run by people, right? And this goes both directions. Some folks think that when like the FTC or the Department of Justice brings a lawsuit in antitrust or whatever else we might have discussed in the video game industry, that it must be a for sure winner because they're really smart people getting paid a lot of money. And it's like, yes, and they're still human beings. And in the same vein, anybody that's making these decisions to put a consultant on X or Y, whether it's Sweet Baby Inc. or someone else, is still a human being making the best choices that they can, but not always the right choices. And so I think we have a tendency in these kind of warrior type battles to view the other side as the enemy, view them as evil, view them as bad. So I'm going to side with Gene on this and say, I don't think that's helpful. I don't think that's healthy to the conversation, because I think you miss each other when you do that. Mm-hmm. And so I would impress upon people that folks make mistakes. Journalists make mistakes, business people make mistakes, consultants make mistakes, and the folks that follow this industry make mistakes. And so I think folks kind of understand that on a broad intellectual level, but it's the truth. Even the smartest human being that you know that's making millions of dollars a year isn't going to make the right call every time. Nobody can see the future.
Yeah, well said. Let me ask you a question, follow up with you a little bit. I know that one of the arguments about a Sweet Baby Inc. or a DEI consultancy specifically getting involved in a project is because the argument is because of ESG so ESG rules, meaning what is that? Environment, social, and governance. So these are things that
this is really the politics scoring that various investor groups do.
Right.
I would say that to the same extent that people are wrong when they say Sweet Baby Inc. is forcing something, they're wrong that ESG forces things in quite this way. They're not wrong to notice that it exists in the investment side or to notice that financial groups pay attention to certain aspects of this, but they're wrong to suggest this kind of cause and effect direct link, because ESG exists in investment. It isn't the only driver of where investments come from. A lot of the companies that we're talking about here, whether you're talking about Sony or some of the other big companies that Sweet Baby Inc. has worked with, are not going to be beholden to investment scores on this side of things. And those investment scores don't even apply to all of the investment funds that a lot of these investors use. So it's one of those things that is like all good conspiracy. There's a kernel there's something happening. There's various aspects of that are slightly accurate. They are not driving this particular story as is sometimes told online.
Yeah, that's important, because I feel like people bring that up, and it's funny you say about the kernel, because I'm like, that's compelling. You could see in like a House of Cards kind of Netflix situation, like how conspiratorial that can get, where it's like this little domino tips off into this big domino, but I would need to see it. Like, saying that happened is compelling, but what you would need to see is like an earnings call from EA where they acknowledge something about DEI or something, and it's in their statement, and then BlackRock invests in EA 10%, and you have the CEO or the CFO on a call with their investors saying like, we're driving this thing towards our investments. And then it's like, okay, you're tying links together that could say like, this is how we came to this point of view. But I find that dubious, because I just agree that the companies fiduciarily want to just make as much money as possible. So like whatever's going to happen on that front is like whatever's going to get them there is
they do. And ESG isn't usually focused on the creative output of the product, right? We're talking about writing in a video game. ESG is more focused on where did you get that silicon from? How did you ship it across the world? These various things that we think about, broad scopes of operations of a company, not the creative output of the widgets.
Right. Yeah. So like conflict minerals and shit like that. And like, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's
Sourcing,
that's important. That's important texture that I don't think a lot of people know, and which is fine. Why would you? But
I don't mind people paying attention to this stuff. I think it's important, but it's not driving the story.
Yeah, that's interesting.
I mean, I think it's weird that people are paying attention to stuff. But yeah.
I mean, my entire channel exists on the notion that a lot of news stories could use more color understanding of law and business. So that's kind of where I live.
Yeah.
It's like it is a reasonable conspiracy. Again, this is like getting mad at people. It's why I hate the term reactionary, because it's almost like they're noticing, like something's happening and the people are noticing. And so that's a reactionary, I guess, whether or not you agree or disagree with it. But it's just like it is one of those situations where it's like, okay, if everyone is so racially focused, if it's all about the color of your skin, if it's all about gender and sexuality, if this and this, if ESG exists, if DEI exists, like I can see, Charlie at the bulletin board putting all the things together. It's not that unbelievable. It's just like, I need to see it like a trial. I would need to see like the evidence. And it's just like, I mean, a crazy example would be like, yeah, the 2016 election was stolen, right? And it's like, okay, that's a really crazy conspiracy. How? Show me all of the evidence, like connect it all together, not just this and this in little bits. It's like, okay, that's a fascinating conspiracy, but that's all that is. It's just, It's a similar and much less important thing, I guess. But I look at all conspiracies like that. Like they're all interesting fundamentally. It's just, is there any evidentiary reason that they exist at all? And I'm just not compelled by this. But again, it's people noticing and making, I think, logical connections with some of this stuff. So I don't begrudge them that.
I think also,
Vanguard and BlackRock really do own basically every company in the United States. And so folks have been talking about that for a while. And then you add on other standards that they use to invest in various companies. And that's how these kinds of stories develop. And I'm not saying that Sony or whomever isn't interested in being as attractive a corporate citizen as possible, but the direct link just isn't there. Not that I've seen, at least.
Right. And,
I mean, Microsoft just came out with a whole policy thing too, where they were talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. And this is after the whole Sweet Baby thing. But I think both of you really hit the nail on the head. It's financially viable to do this. Mm-hmm. It is financially. People do spend money on stuff that is just a little bit more diverse, and that's why people are doing it, because there is a financial incentive to it.
Yeah, definitely.
Wouldn't you want a Dragon Ball Z? That's a huge hit in Latin America. Wouldn't you want to try to figure that out? The issue is how they're going about it, which is stupid.
Yeah, again, ham-fisted and just It's funny because the DEI consultancy, like. You make a great point about BlackRock and Vanguard as an example. It's like they own so much. I don't think they give a shit what happens in Goodbye Volcano High. Like I think that they have probably bigger fish to fry. Like that's kind of my conclusion. Like Occam's razor, right? It's like even with big things like WB and all this and Suicide Squad, it's like I still think that that's small. They don't give a shit about that. They want like real estate and oil and minerals and. I don't know. I just think people are there is real power to culture, but I'm not even sure that people in the power and positions of power at various companies understand how powerful video games are yet. If anything, they're probably over-investing still in film, streaming. I was reminded that, remember Quibi, that company Quibi that existed for like a year and they spent like $2 billion on it. It's like, they don't even know the power of games yet. Those people, again, these are the people that thought G4 was a good idea. So we have to give them at least a little bit of time to get here, and then they will inevitably exploit us. But that's almost the scary thing, is like I'm not even sure we're at the exploitation point yet. Like film,
but also good. But all things exist, right? Like that's the thing, is most of the things. I was kind of playing with this analogy as well over the last couple of days, leading up to this, which is that it seems like the things that are most diverse and things that, let's just use pander for lack of a better term, right? Pander to those audiences, are more in that indie space. They would almost be, to use a film analogy, they would be like the documentaries to the big blockbusters of the world. So these guys coming out, what they're really complaining about are all these like independent small movies that are making like a few $100,000, maybe up to $5 million a year, when the mainstream stuff remains the big tentpole stuff like Dune Part 2, which still stars, Timothy Chalamet, and does have diversity with, but people are cool with it for whatever reason.
Because Dune is awesome.
Right. I haven't seen it yet. Still need to see it. I actually had a ticket to see Dune and then canceled the ticket because I wanted to keep playing Rebirth.
Oh.
So
that was a great weekend. Dune Part 2 and Rebirth.
Yeah, but Dune is awesome and Spider-Man 2 is not. So
I love Dune.
Spider-Man 2. Right? And that's the thing. I didn't mind Spider-Man 2. If anything, I thought it falls victim to what most of these bigger budget games are falling victim to, which is that they're too long.
Yeah, no, I thought it was too long. It's overstuffed. But yeah, I loved Miles Morales, and I didn't like Spider-Man 2. So it's not the Miles character. It's that plot line in particular.
I absolutely feel that there was all throughout my experience of Spider-Man 2. I didn't talk about it because it feels cringy to say, but all throughout the Spider-Man 2 experience, I was like, man, there's a lot of weird shit in here that feels just kind of.
But I also have that same thought for Rebirth. Like I love Rebirth, but actually I'm playing it, and Gene, here's another point where maybe we'll connect on, where I thought, man, you know what was a better paced version of this game? Xenoblade Chronicles, like every Xenoblade Chronicles game, because they didn't always throw a ridiculous minigame at me.
When you were going to say Final Fantasy VII.
No, but the structure of Rebirth and Xenoblade Chronicles is like identical, but it's more smooth. But I could point to that critically,
I completely agree with you, but we're not ready for that conversation yet. So
now we're getting away from the original point. But I think that the diversity point, I don't know, does my point about more of this niche area kind of makes sense? Like that's where it does. Is coming from.
I think it does sound. It sounds silly to care about Goodbye Volcano High. It's not going to do damage to any kind of culture. It's fine existing on its own, and people like what they like about it.
Yeah, totally. And I think first of all, I think that Gone Home was always the great example of this to me, where like everyone's like, this is a woke game. And I'm like, what? Like fundamentally, what is woke about it? Like it's just because it's about gay people. Like you got to kind of like divorce. Like that's the thing that, again, we don't have the right arbiters of this conversation at all on like the culture warrior side. It's just too much. But I don't want to keep you guys much longer. I know we've been going a long time, so we'll quickly go around and answer this last one. How does this moment differ from 2014 and 2015, the last time we saw a similar cultural backlash? So just to start it off, and I'll go to you first, Jason, and I've said this already, is I just think the power structure has shifted entirely. It's unusual to get a replay of something like this and watch it deal with a totally different structural reality than it did 10 years ago. The arguments, I think, are actually somewhat different. People are calling it Gamergate 2 or whatever. I find this salvo much more interesting than the first one because I think that there's more meat on the bone this time around. But I do think that what's majorly different is just the players are totally different, and you can just tell that the traditional space is drowning, like it has no pushback. And I find that the most illustrative example I've been talking about of just the destruction of that space.
Yeah. How is this different? Well, I guess the biggest difference for me is that I understand it this time around. I still don't. I have said it before. Like I didn't understand when it was happening the first time. I don't understand when I read about it now. But this one is pretty obvious, where I could see what people are mad about, and I can at least understand in my head why it's pretty silly. And that's the biggest difference to me between now and then. But I think the other big elephant in the room is that we are now we're in a post-Trump time. We're on Elon Musk's X. If I'm going to call it what it is, and I hate it, but it's like everything has just become more politicized, more extreme. There's no middle ground. There's no compromise. You can't do this on the places where most of the conversation is happening. It would be great if anytime some issue comes up, people could jump on a 3-hour podcast and really hash it out. But that's not how it works online. I mean, it happened with and I've reached out to you about it. The whole Israel-Palestine thing. Like that conversation should not happen on Twitter, but it does because people have to say something about it.
It shouldn't happen in games either. Like, what does games have to say about this?
Yeah, exactly. Jeff Keighley was right to not. I'll say it. Jeff Keighley was right to not say anything about it at the Game Awards because it's not something that's a statement. It's a discussion. It's too complicated. But in the scheme, and that was then where things were even more murky. I think now it's where things were anyway. Doesn't matter. I'm getting into the weeds. The point is, I think it's all of those things coming together. And it is a lot of grifting. I think it is a lot of people going for the lulz or the memes or owning the libs. And that is definitely a part of it.
And,
like there's no way it's not.
There is. And I'm sorry, go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, and it's just chaos, man. It's chaos out there. Some of the people who are like, why are boobs anti-woke? Why are that's a whole nother part that we never even got to. Why is it that the Stellar Blade boobs are anti-woke, but Tifa's boobs weren't? Like, where was this conversation like 2 months ago? There's a lot of hypocrisy. There's a lot of silliness. I think it's all agenda driven, and the nature of our political landscape and social media just amplifies this thing way more than it did 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's funny, man. When you say that, there is a difference, though. Like, so I noticed this thing in Final Fantasy VII Rebirth where this character was conspicuously describing a person as they, right? And I was like, okay, Square Enix would never do this. So clearly they're trying to obscure the person's gender by making it mysterious who they're talking about, but it came off so conspicuous. But I knew that Square Enix wouldn't do that. So I'm like already programmed to notice these kinds of things as well as a player, and like
notice here, man.
Like off. But
yeah, I wonder which character you're talking about now.
Same.
It's I'll just say it. It's because I don't think it's a major spoiler. It's a totally inconsequential thing. It's Kyrie when you encounter her or whatever.
Oh, okay.
The guy will keep saying like the merc, they went up to this part and they said this. And I'm like,
yes.
Okay, well, this is a Japanese game, not going to get involved in that kind of stuff. So they're clearly talking about a woman. And it was funny that I was able to glean that information, because if that was a Ubisoft game, I would have been like, what the fuck are they? Are we using the they them pronoun? Are we talking about multiple people? Are they trying to obscure the thing? It's funny that knowing the developer or publisher, you can kind of glean that information. So I just thought that was that was interesting.
Yeah.
But all right, let's go to you, Gene. How does this moment differ from 2014 and 2015, the last time we saw a similar cultural backlash?
I think that I disagree with you slightly, that I think both sides are a little bit weaker. Part of the reason why I haven't covered this is because I don't think there's a huge backlash against Sweet Baby. I don't think it's that big. I see a lot of this stuff is happening on Twitter, right? I see more replies in the shipping war between Aerith and Tifa and Cloud than I do the people talking about Sweet Baby.
Can't believe that's even a discussion. That's insane.
It is, but it's a lot more heated. There's a lot more people more passionate about that, more angry about that than there are about Sweet Baby, which has about 300,000 people following the Steam creation list. Sounds like a lot of people, but when you think about the big picture, it's really not. But also I also agree that in terms of the media, that it's been quite defanged. These pieces will come out and people will be much more skeptical of it. They won't really listen to it, and the people who are inclined to agree with it will agree with it, and that's it. You know, there's no. I don't think there's a widening of any kind of discussion here. That's pretty much my perspective on it. I think Jason had brought up a really great point about how much worse it feels because of the social platforms and how they're programmed and engineered to kind of incentivize the outrage. I do see a lot of grifters hopping onto it. These people do include my friends, RGT85 and Ono is Alex on YouTube. They're definitely hopping onto this topic and just kind of, doing what they do. And the whole reason why I don't call them out on it is because that's their job. Their job is outrage manufacturers. So that's what they're doing, Well, what am I going to do? That's how they make their money. So yeah, and they know what they do best,
Yeah, the intra, like the intra, like industry grifting, I'm like not really that, I don't really care much about. The one grifter that I saw trying to come into this was Matt Walsh from the Daily Wire. And I actually had messages behind the scenes with like some big conservative people like in our space and other where I was like, under no circumstances is this clown getting involved in this. Like I will have to become involved at that point because this guy has been so anti-video games, so anti-anime, so anti-culture in that sense. It's like, go fuck yourself. This is not like, you are not coming into this space. And people let him know loud and clear, like, nope, bye. And I think he has some interesting things to say about some things, but like he is an anti-culturist weirdo in the sense that like I talk to people behind the scenes a lot, like in conservative culture. And it's like, why I'm so interesting to a lot of people in that space and like the political space is because like I'm one of the few people in conservative mainstream culture in some sense online that sees the value of entertainment and video games, and that it should be owned in part by the ideology of conservatism, just like liberalism has owned a major part of it for so long, and that it's an important part of the culture war. But I also realize that most games shouldn't be and aren't political. It's just that the manufacture of them, as we've gone into in this conversation, is deeply political, always. And so anyway, I, as far as the grifters are concerned, intra-industry grifters is like, whatever. The inter-industry grifting, no. I'm going to look deeply into the things you were saying about video games, and this Matt Walsh guy has been like just totally crazy anti-game, and it's like, go fuck off into a rocket somewhere and shoot yourself into some other industry. I mean, you're not, no way. So yeah, I don't like, and what's funny about the grifting too is not a lot of people, a handful of people make a lot of money doing it, but most of these people are selling their souls in some sense for pennies. It's like, it's not even worth it. Like,
not even worth it.
You know, anyway, let's end with you, Hogue.
Look, I'm friends with Ian Mouse Chong, you know, so I have no mouth to speak. You know?
Yeah, I've spoken with him, but I don't know that we consider him friends, but I feel like he's a truly like, I'd like to interview him one day. I think he's a truly interesting figure because he comes from Gamergate, and he was mega progressive, like one of the annoying ones.
He was on the quote unquote other side of whatever of Gamergate. He was on the more
very
progressive
weird
side.
Like very,
he's a weird guy, man.
Yeah, he is.
I call him friend. He's definitely an acquaintance, but he's absolutely one of my first top 5 followers on fucking Twitter. So. You know, we that our history goes long. It's weird.
He probably makes a nice living, I would assume, with the newly monetized X. But most people,
I think he does. I think he's fine. Yeah,
and he lives like overseas too, so he probably has a much.
Yeah, he's famously in Malaysia, and
Malaysia,
he did not
get
executed.
Yeah,
he did not get executed in Malaysia. So
they're gonna fucking cut his head off or something. All right.
Yeah.
Hogue, how does this moment differ from 2014 and 2015, the last time we saw a similar cultural backlash, from your perspective?
So I can't speak to Gamergate 1.0 because I wasn't really involved at the time. I wasn't online. I didn't have a channel. I was on NeoGAF, if I'm remembering correctly, back then. Yeah. So I did see it happen as it went down, but I don't really know too much of the specifics. I can say for this iteration that it is noticeably artificial to me in a way that I don't know whether that applies to the first version of Gamergate. To me, this was a fairly benign Steam group that was looking at a specific company's contributions to video games. And it was that company's individual and a Kotaku article that really spun off into ultimately becoming, was it Take This that wound up calling it Gamergate 2.0?
Right, yeah. And they released a statement. Yeah.
And I thought, I even said this in my video, that was premature. I still don't know that there's a lot here in terms of what's actually going on between these particular groups.
I agree.
I think that winds up, to me, feeling like both sides just feeding on each other in order to make it seem like a bigger deal than it is.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether that was
exactly what it is. I think they're just both sucking each other off, you know.
Well, I mean, I'll let Gene's phrasing survive that, but that's how it feels to me. And if that was the case the first time around, I think that's its own problem and worthy of discussion, which is that whether we're talking about ethics in journalism or how journalism functions, it really shouldn't be building up these particular moments on its own in order to fight either within itself or with these groups that it characterizes as needing fighting. So that's what I see in Gamergate 2.0, as it were. But I've already said as part of this video that I can construct a reasoned argument for how you could be okay or want to know when a given consultancy, developer, middleware provider, whatever, is involved in the games that you're playing or the movies that you're watching. And so I can understand why that would happen. And to me, I can't imagine a world in which I don't want folks to be allowed to identify who's involved in the creation of whatever it is that they're consuming and saying, I want that or I don't want that. And I think that has to be something that is essentially beyond the pale. I disagree entirely with the media jumping on a group on its own that says, I just don't want to be involved in purchasing this group's products. And so that's where I get most kind of frustrated or outrage is by the notion that media or others should circle the wagons and prevent consumers from saying, I don't want to consume things made by these particular consultants or groups or what have you. But because bad actors do exist and human beings will have those bad actors in whatever groups you form them into, I understand how they are characterized as bad or good, for goodness sake.
That's well said at the end. I think you make a great point that, but I think, let me back up. You make a great point that this seems bigger than it is, but I think that this is true for many things. And I think it's even true for the original Gamergate. I have very, very vivid memories of going to Kentucky my last few months at IGN. I went there for my 30th birthday, and it was like the beginning of Gamergate. And I went to like dinner at this nice restaurant in like Lexington, and the people went out with some of my friends' and they were asking like, oh, I heard about this on PBS, or I heard about this on NPR or whatever. I heard about this. And it made it even then seem like a bigger cultural thing than it was. And it was also happening like towards the beginning of Trump as a factor, but pre-Trump. And I know a lot of people even draw like a line from Gamergate to like the rise of Donald Trump, which I find so interesting. But I've always been of the mind that the original Gamergate was not what it seemed to be either, that it was not really a cultural force. It didn't really do much of anything. There were people that obviously were heightened, like Anita Sarkeesian and others through it. There was definitely a movement towards maybe more equality, and certainly got a lot of like unsavory people into the industry in some sense. But I kind of feel the same thing about this one too. But it actually, to me, on the other side, I feel like a lot of it is dictated by mainstream coverage. And so it seems to me that there might actually be more people in on this one, that it's actually bigger than the original one. Not major, not even important. But when you have 350 or 400,000 people joining a Steam group, that's a lot of people. I mean, that's at least some sort of task that I have to join this thing. You're going to be associated with it. You can't really hide it, you know? And I think that that's people speaking fairly loudly about something that I think it encapsulates. We were talking about scapegoats, right? Unfortunately, a lot of these different scapegoats, it encapsulates something people know is wrong, or like that they need to fight against. And it comes off sometimes as tilting at windmills because they haven't selected the appropriate targets or really focused in on something, but they know they're mad about something, and that something is real. It's just a matter of whether they're directional or not with why what's happening to them is happening to them, or what they think is happening in the industry is happening. So I don't take away from their numbers. I think it is very localized to social media and forums. I think most people that play games have no idea any of this is happening and never will. But I don't want to cop out either with that, because that's true with many things we talk about on our podcast. Like a lot of people wouldn't know almost anything we talk about on our podcast.
That's true. I mean, we're talking about here. I mean, you know, I'm not going to discount it because it's not a big deal, because we have a whole episode on it, and right. I want it to be on this episode too. So,
but at the same time, Gene, it's funny because I wanted to do this separate episode to flesh it out and keep it away from the main episode, because like we talked about it a little bit on Sacred Symbols a couple of times, but I think it's fine to fight culture wars, and like I want to be part of the culture war in my own way, but I think it's got to be like appropriate to the product and stuff. And I don't want to ignore this topic because it's obviously something people want to talk about, but the kind of culture war I'm really trying to fight on Sacred Symbols, if any, is like one of where games are made, how they're made, and who's paying for them and who's investing in them and all of that. That's kind of the political front I want to be on. This is like a totally different thing, but I think it's still worth talking about, which is why I wanted to dedicate an episode of it and hopefully allay people's constant requests for us to talk more about it. So, all right, let's go around the horn.
You'll have to let me know how that goes for you.
Yeah,
Colin.
I know.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah. I have no idea how this is going to go for people too. So.
Well, I think my personal interpretation as we go around and say goodbye to everyone is I thought this was a great conversation.
I thought this was a great conversation too.
Metered.
Yeah.
I'll let people interpret it however they want, but I don't think there's anything we did here to make the conversation worse. I think we've made it a lot better. Jason, goodbye to you. I pulled it up today. I saw when I was reading Push Square, Atari's retro revivals continue with top-down racer Neo Sprint on PS4. So congratulations on the new announcement.
Thank you. Yep, that'll be coming out in, we didn't announce the date, and we actually then followed up with a conversation, which is, why don't we just announce the date when we announce the game? But what does have a date is Lunar Lander Beyond, which I was the producer on. So if you don't like it, again, let me know. Don't blame any other consultants.
Yeah, the buck stops with
blame Sweet Baby for this.
Jason detected.
Baby with.
Yeah, Jason detected. Oh my God, yeah. Oh no, they tag me. They tag me on Twitter, like some of the Atari fans when they're not happy. They let me know.
That's great.
And they tag. Yeah, it's
in
wild.
marketing. I always believe that you should just use your one opportunity to get someone's attention, give them all the possible information. This is something I rail against all the time on Sacred Symbols, is when people announce Kickstarters.
Yeah.
It's like it's January 10th. On March 2nd, we're going to launch a Kickstarter. It's like, I don't give a fuck. Like, why wouldn't you take your opportunity to, like, the day you say something, to have you have a Kickstarter, I'm ready to invest in it.
I actually put one in my calendar that I was excited about. So
nice.
It did work.
Oh, okay, well, fair enough.
I had to couple myself in those conversations, but I do want to say, so just in closing, first of all, thanks for having me on this one. I know I was the last chair here, so thanks for letting me crash. I was definitely incentivized when I heard that Gene and Hogue were going to be here.
Oh yeah, he had said that he wanted to meet. When you guys were on. He said he wanted to meet you guys both. So yeah, I'm glad.
So you guys were on. I was like, well, hey, if I'm invited, you're the content. You run the content. So if I'm welcome, I'll be there.
Cool.
But I do want to say two things on the closing on the topic. One is that the best use of like cultural diversity, or whatever you want to call it, DEI in a game, is easily Rogue Legacy 1 and 2, where one of the traits that can be applied is you're gay. And it does nothing. It just says you're a fan of the man or you're a fan of woman, and that's it. Otherwise, it does nothing, which is what equality is all about. And lastly, I said I don't understand why the Tifa Aerith discussion is a discussion. Not because people shouldn't talk about it, but because how is it not Tifa? It's Tifa. It's always Tifa.
Oh, you went the wrong direction there, Jason.
We could fight about this offline.
They really push Aerith on you in this game, though.
I disagree, but we can fight. And I remember you saying that. I also disagree, but we'll, that's
well, I mean, that's the thing about Rebirth.
This is why it's a discussion. We just proved it.
Well, I mean, Rebirth is fuck because they clearly want everybody to have their own cake and eat it too. So they're trying to please everybody, and then we're all fighting about it,
Cloud just annoys me so much. It's like Cloud,
Jesse,
my boy. First of all, it was all about Jesse, right? But
there you go.
But clearly,
get that. Everybody loves Cloud.
But it's just like, dude, it's so painful. Like these women, every woman is throwing themselves at you. Like, wake up.
Yeah,
you're so brooding and annoying.
Sorry for that derailment.
Okay.
But
he's got a lot going on.
Yeah, he does have a lot going on. That's true. Gene, goodbye to you, my friend. It was good to be here with you today.
Yeah. I was a last minute addition to this, but I thought about, like, do I want to talk? Yeah, I actually do want to talk about it. There's a lot on my mind about this topic, and it's been bugging me. So I'm glad to be part of this. And just to echo what you said earlier, I think this was a really great conversation. Jason, it was great to talk to you too. I'm really glad he was here to offer that perspective too.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, thank you.
I'm pumped about Lunar Lander, so it's good.
Hell yeah.
Hogue, goodbye to you, my friend. Be well. Have you on soon.
Goodbye. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I have to say, when I got the invite for this episode and it said Sweet Baby Inc., I wasn't sure what we were going to talk about. So it was with a certain amount of trepidation that I said, sure, absolutely, because I know that this kind of thing will get clipped and sent around, and whatever happens on the internet. So I am very happy that this was exactly the kind of conversation I wanted to have with you all. And obviously, one of my taglines is reasonable minds can differ. I believe that thoroughly. And so that applies, obviously, to the forces fighting for or against Sweet Baby Inc. It applies in this group, too. So I am very glad to have been a part of this conversation. Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, man. You're very welcome here always. And yeah, I think that there's like a cartoon version of me out there that people think where it's like, this is like my fucking shit, and I'm like a real culture warrior through and through. And
no. There are people who have been waiting for you to like say shit on this. They're like, oh, has he said anything on it?
Yeah, it's like and again, like I am a willing participant in the culture war. I just think that it has to be balanced and interesting. And that's why I brought up that Katie girl before, like the one I had the personal interaction with, because it's like the honest truth is like I don't really know any of these people, so we're judging them based like on other people's interactions. I really only have something to say about one of them in particular, and I tend to think the best about most people anyway, as was said earlier. So I don't know. I think it was important to us to acknowledge it. I don't want to ignore things that I don't necessarily have a huge passion for if the audience does and that they are relevant. I am just wary with 22 years of experience in games coverage now. It's like, I don't want to come off. It's like why I name Sacred Symbols Insane Things. People have over the years noticed that, like, I don't give a shit what Sacred Symbols has no click value at all when you look at the titles. It's like, I do that because it's like, come in and listen and there's no expectation other than quality and we're going to get deep into something, but I don't want to like bait you. And I don't want this to be like this thing that recurs on the regular episode over and over again. So if things develop, we'll obviously revisit it. But otherwise, I say we put a pin in it for now.
This is why you're not a reactionary, Colin, because what a reactionary actually means is that you're just reacting for the sake of reacting and you're trying to benefit from it. But this is why I'm on Last Stand Media, because this is not a reactionary news network. This is just a conversational podcast, which is exactly what we offer. You know?
Thank you. Appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Well, guys, I appreciate your time. It was good to see all of you. Good to be all here with all of you out there as well. Patreon.com/laststandmedia. You know that because you're probably watching it or listening to it here. Maybe you're stealing it. I don't know. Laststandmedia.store for merch. New live shows, information coming soon, meetings happening, dates being solidified. So we'll have more to say about that in the coming weeks. All right, that's it. We'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye. Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Colin's Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you.